Yes, we discussed with Mr. Cayer directly, and he consents to that procedure as well.
Mr. Cayer? Yes, you consent to that?
Yep.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to just make it clear so that when this does occur, everyone knows who we're referring to when we're asking you to just pull your mask down or remove it from one of the ear, whatever is easier for you. So everyone on this side, meaning my right side, that's seated right behind defense counsel's table, and everyone on this side, including the first row. Are the 4 of you in the first row comfortable with that? And they're nodding yes. Okay. All right. And there was there another issue you wanted to address?
There
or
were
put
a
on the
couple of
record?
preliminary issues. The other issue is that Mr. Kennedy is going to be one of the state's first witnesses. The parties have stipulated that he has 1 prior criminal conviction.
That's correct?
Yes.
In addition, there was an issue about some information that is taken from Mr. Cayer's statement to law enforcement that the state wishes to introduce through the law enforcement officer who took the statement from Mr. Cayer that potentially alleges a prior bad act. It's not actually a suggestion that Mr. Cayer engaged in the prior bad act, but rather that Mr. Cayer believes that an allegation was made against him, and that serves as his motivation. It's his stated motivation to the law enforcement officer, and then also an independent statement to an additional citizen witness where Mr. Cayer talks about the allegation made against him by one of the deceased, Sabrina Teague, and he gets very upset about that allegation. The state seeks to introduce that information. The parties agreed we were going to flush that issue out more thoroughly when we have more time on a break, either at lunch or at the end of the day today, and that the state will not reference that allegation specifically in the opening statement, nor will any of the witnesses that proceed prior to us flushing that issue out mention anything about that allegation.
And that's my understanding of the agreement that's been reached, and then we'll make a thorough record and I'll make a decision on it when we have more time.
Thank you.
All right. Any other issues?
I think that's it for now.
All right. So when the jury is brought in, the first thing I'm going to do is have the clerk administer the oath, and then we'll proceed to opening statements. I will take care of a couple of preliminary issues, like double checking that they're comfortable, especially the juror that's seated closest to, we're in tight quarters here, closest to where the investigator is sitting. I just want to make sure that jurors feel comfortable so there's no indication that they were otherwise distracted. All right. Please stand for the jury. Please be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now you're in our actual courtroom. As you can see, it's a little snugger quarters than one would hope, but with the plexiglass barriers, I just want to make sure that everyone feels like they are comfortable and distanced from the person next to them. Are you comfortable with the setting? Raise your hand if you're comfortable with the setting. Everyone is raising their hand. Now, we have a lot of participants in this proceeding, and as you can see, we're distancing the best we can with the tables. They've all decided that they're basically like a household. They work together every minute of the day for the last however many days or weeks, so they're comfortable being close to one another. The one thing I want to make sure is that little table on the end, especially the juror that's closest to that you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, we'll make some other arrangements. Are you okay with that, sir? All right, he's indicating yes. If at any point you have a concern, just express it to myself or the bailiff. The bailiff's probably the easiest to reach. You do have a baggie with some materials. Now, the one thing you have in there are notepads and pencils. You're not allowed to take notes during the opening statement, so I just want to remind you of that. Not until the first witness is called can you take notes. The temperature, we waited a few minutes to address a couple of issues, but also to allow the temperature to decrease a little bit. It was very, very hot in here this morning. It's already getting cooler. If that is an issue for you one way or the other, again, address that with the bailiff, and we'll do the best we can to accommodate. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'm going to ask the clerk to administer the oath. So if you would please stand and raise your right hand.
Solemnly swear that you will well and truly try the issues in between the plaintiff and the defendant and a true verdict give, according to the law, the evidence in court, so help you God.
Thank you. You may be seated. Now, the other thing I want to make you all aware of is there's a little bit of play in the middle of those plexiglass barriers. If you need to scoot your chair one way or the other to see better, you're welcome to do that. We can even arrange some of those plexiglass barriers. Most of them can be moved a little bit. I turned off some of the lights when you came in because the glare can be difficult. So if at any point you're having difficulty seeing or you need the lights adjusted, again, just let us know. You can simply raise your hand and we'll address that. Especially those of you in the back, that upper row, you may have to move your chair a little bit to avoid that plexiglass barrier so that you can see the witness well enough. All right. The attorneys are going to start with their opening statements momentarily. I've asked that they attempt to do that from counsel table just so that they have microphones. First of all, with masks, we're very worried that everyone can hear well enough, so they're closer to microphones, and then just so that they're not out in this kind of crowded space otherwise. You're welcome to turn your chairs if that helps you, adjust yourself in any way, because I believe it's Mr. Lassay and Mr. Cotton that will be giving the opening statements. So, ladies and gentlemen, the lawyers will now make opening statements. The purpose of an opening statement is to give the lawyers an opportunity to tell you what they expect the evidence will show so that you will better understand the evidence as it is introduced during the trial. I must caution you, however, that the opening statements are not evidence. Mr. Lassay?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I appreciate that you all showed up today. This is obviously extraordinary times, and we're taking extraordinary measures here in the courtroom to make sure that everybody feels safe. And I appreciate that you showed up and that you're willing to hear this case. It's very important to the state. It's very important to Mr. Cayer that you do that. As the court indicated, the purpose of an opening statement is to sort of provide a guide map or an outline for where we think the case is going to go. It's not an opportunity to make arguments at this point, and my statements aren't evidence. They merely introduce to you what I think the evidence will show. Sitting at counsel table is highly unusual for me during an opening statement. As the court indicated, we're taking measures to make sure everything can be heard. If you are at all having trouble hearing me or understanding what I'm saying because of the mask or because of the lack of volume or whatever it may be, please raise your hand and alert the court and let us know. You're here today to hear the case of State of Wisconsin versus Jacob Cayer. What you will hear is that on June 7th, 2016, Jacob Cayer turned 1368 Riverdale Drive in the village of Hobart into a real-life horror movie. Sabrina Teague and her live-in boyfriend Joel Kennedy, they walked on the scene of that horror movie at 8 p.m. that night. When they entered the home through the garage door, Sabrina walked into the home. They could hear the shower running in the bathroom. Sabrina walked to the first floor bathroom where her mother's dead and badly beaten body was located. She took out her phone to call 911, started walking back toward the kitchen area where Joel was located. Mr. Cayer jumped out of the door in the laundry room and attacked them with a knife. This is a real-life horror movie description. Mr. Cayer attacked both Sabrina and Joel in the living room, Joel Kennedy is an eyewitness to this event who survived the brutal attack from Mr. Cayer. Not unharmed, mind you, but with significant injuries himself. A struggle ensued in the kitchen. Mr. Kennedy was able to go outside to the garage and grab a snow shovel. The struggle continued in the garage area as Sabrina and Mr. Cayer poured out into the garage. Joel struck Mr. Cayer in the face with the shovel. There are physical injuries consistent with that. Mr. Cayer went to the ground and Mr. Kennedy ran back in the house. He closed the door to the garage. He ran past the bathroom where Heesun Teague lay dead, into Heesun's room where he closed the door and locked it, into Heesun's bathroom in her master bedroom where he closed the door and locked it, and he called 911. You will hear that 911 call. You'll hear the panic in his voice. You'll hear him huffing and puffing, explaining how blood is spurting out of his arm. Joel Kennedy had been stabbed with a kitchen knife that went in one side, out the other, and into his chest. As he lay on the floor in the kitchen before getting up, kicking Mr. Cayer off, and having the struggle ensue. He knew that Sabrina had been left with Mr. Cayer in the garage area of the home. Sabrina eventually opened the garage door, and the struggle ensued and poured out of the garage into the driveway area, into some foliage and trees outside the residence. There is a blood trail leading, there's a blood trail everywhere. This entire house is covered with blood. There's a blood trail leading from the garage down the driveway into a tree line and into the backyard of the neighbor's residence where Sabrina's body was located by law enforcement officers just minutes later. The knife covered in Sabrina's blood is located in that tree line by law enforcement officers the next day. Exactly where Mr. Cayer diagrammed it in a map of his confession to law enforcement. This is a real-life horror movie, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a mystery. We know exactly who caused these deaths. We know exactly what happened. Unlike many cases, this is not a situation where it's a whodunit. There is an eyewitness to the events that transpired, Joel Kennedy. Mr. Cayer is found by law enforcement about 30 minutes after their arrival, hiding in the woods behind the house covered in blood, where he's found by a canine unit from the Brown County Sheriff's Office. He is arrested. He is brought to the hospital where he gives a detailed, many-hour confession to Sergeant Holzbach of the Brown County Sheriff's Office. DNA evidence is located on the knife, confirming that that was the knife that killed Sabrina Teague. Detailed DNA evidence is found on a tire iron located inside the house, which confirms that Heesun Teague's blood is located on the curved end of that tire iron, and DNA consistent with Mr. Cayer is found on the handle. Sabrina Teague's blood is located on swabs from Mr. Cayer's hands, both of them. This is not a whodunit, ladies and gentlemen. You have an eyewitness, you found on the scene covered in blood, a confession, and DNA evidence. Over the course of the next few days, the state will present a number of witnesses to you to demonstrate that Mr. Cayer committed these offenses. As indicated, you will hear first the 911 call. You will hear Joel Kennedy calling 911 and explaining to them what happened, that they were attacked in their home. You will hear them identifying it as Jake and identifying Mr. Cayer as Sabrina's ex-boyfriend. Joel will explain to you how he had met Jake on one prior occasion at Walmart. There was a brief argument between Mr. Cayer and Sabrina, but he was able to identify then Mr. Cayer as Sabrina's ex-boyfriend. He will tell you Mr. Cayer had never been to the home during the 7 months that he lived with Sabrina at that residence. In addition to Mr. Kennedy's statement about what happened, you will hear about how law enforcement officers arrived on the scene shortly thereafter. They came upon the scene making a tactical approach based on the nature of the call that came in from Mr. Kennedy, that it was a weapons call. The officers who approached from the right side of the residence walked up into the neighbor's backyard where they saw Sabrina's body lying in the backyard. They rolled her over and attempted to administer aid, but she was deceased. After that, other officers made contact with Mr. Kennedy at the front door of the residence, cleared the residence, walked Mr. Kennedy out of the residence where he was cooperative with law enforcement. He was removed to emergency services. Officers cleared the residence and began a perimeter search for Mr. Cayer. Shortly thereafter, officers located Mr. Cayer on scene. He was taken into custody by the officers, brought to a clearing where he was searched. His pockets were emptied. In his pockets, there was rope, cord. In his pockets was Sabrina's cell phone. His clothes were covered in blood. The officers will tell you that his pants, his shirt, a mask or a head covering that he had, all had significant blood staining on them. Mr. Cayer was transported to the hospital and gave a detailed statement to Sergeant Holzbach and Sergeant Yankee of the Brown County Sheriff's Office. It's not a situation where after 12 hours of being grilled, he finally said, yeah, I did it, you got me. It is a detailed statement that indicates many aspects of this that are corroborated by the forensic evidence recovered on scene and the photographs that are taken by the state crime lab when they come to that scene. He talks about the water running. Both the shower and the sink in the bathroom where Heesun Teague's body were both running when law enforcement arrived. You can hear it on the 911 tape. Officers will tell you that they turned that off. Mr. Cayer can talk about washing himself and washing his feet during his statement. Socks are recovered in the sink of that bathroom with Heesun Teague's blood on them. Mr. Cayer is barefoot when he's recovered by law enforcement officers. He talks about stabbing. There is a video. You will see a video of Mr. Cayer taking a pen and reenacting the stabbing motion toward Sabrina Teague's neck and upper torso, consistent with a large stab wound to Sabrina Teague's neck, which unfortunately you will have to see in the photographs from the medical examiner. He will talk about, in addition to the stabbing, that there was blunt force injuries, that he recalls swinging a hammer or an object like a hammer, not a hammer, but something like a hammer. He recalls swinging that. He believes in the bathroom, consistent with the tire iron recovered and the significant blunt force injuries to Heesun Teague that you will observe. He talks about riding his bike to the scene. He talks about putting on his headphones and getting angry and getting worked up listening to Hollywood Undead. You will find that his bike is recovered on scene. Officers noticed it in the tree line as they made the approach from the left-hand side. They photographed his bike turned over on scene. You will note that there's an open window outside of Sabrina's bedroom, clearly visible from the outside of the home that the window is ajar, and then from the inside that window is broken. There's grass inside as if that was the area for forced entry. You will also learn that officers recovered a backpack on scene, a backpack filled with miscellaneous items, Mr. Cayer's identification card, his driver's license inside that backpack, along with knives, scrapers, a rusty railroad spike, a hammer that is duct taped and fashioned as a weapon with a carabiner on it. There are zip ties recovered in the residence by Heesun Teague's body, consistent with the zip ties found in Mr. Cayer's backpack. The tire iron used to kill Heesun Teague is wrapped in duct tape. There's a roll of duct tape in Mr. Cayer's backpack. There's duct tape around that hammer with the carabiner fashioned as a weapon. He details the rage that he has and the anger that he felt that night, that he had been in an argument, that he rode to that scene angry. He provides a diagram of where these events took place to law enforcement. The law enforcement officer taking his statement had not been to the scene. This is a Hobart Lawrence scene where DCI, the Division of Criminal Investigation for the state, was on scene. The sergeant who took the statement had not been out there. They were relaying some information back and forth, but he had very little information. They had not found the knife. Mr. Cayer provided a diagram outlining exactly where the knife would be located, and that's right where they found it. And he recalls Sabrina being stabbed in some foliage, completely consistent with the crime scene that we located as she stumbled out from the garage into the driveway, into that tree line where there's blood staining, and into the neighbor's backyard. When you hear that statement to Sergeant Holzbach, you'll hear parts of it. You'll hear Sergeant Holzbach talk about the statement, and then you will actually hear parts of it, and you will see the reenactment. And then you will see the evidence from the crime lab. You will see the pictures from the scene corroborating the information given in that statement. It will be abundantly clear to you that Mr. Cayer is the person who caused the death of Heesun and Sabrina Teague, and that he did so with intent to kill them. And again, you will hear then from the crime lab, from the DNA analyst who will confirm. You'll hear DNA evidence isn't perfect. And we talked about this in voir dire. There's blood all over this house, right? And the crime lab isn't going to test 300 samples of blood from every different location in that house. The purpose of DNA is to identify who is our perpetrator. With Sabrina Teague's blood on his hands, literally, her blood on the knife, DNA consistent with Mr. Cayer and Heesun Teague on the tire iron. The DNA evidence that was tested is consistent and confirms what an eyewitness told you and what Mr. Cayer himself confessed to. At the end of this case, you will be presented with all the facts, but you'll also be presented then with jury instructions. Those jury instructions outline the elements that the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. As we discussed briefly at voir dire, the elements for first-degree intentional homicide are relatively straightforward. Did Mr. Cayer cause their death? And did he do so with intent to kill? Both will be abundantly clear after you hear the evidence in this case. For all the reasons I state above, we know our perpetrator. He himself admitted to it. We have an eyewitness. There's DNA. He's found on scene covered in blood. It doesn't get any simpler than that in terms of who committed these offenses. His intent to kill is likewise clear. You will hear from the medical examiner about the abundant, vicious injuries these two women suffered. There can be no other intent when you stab someone 10 times or more. There can be no other intent when you batter someone so badly with a tire iron and stab them and have them hanging by a rope in the bathroom. What else could Mr. Cayer's intent have been but to kill those two women? Likewise with Joel. You will be asked whether he caused the injury, whether he attempted to do this, and whether he intended to kill Joel. Joel has a gaping wound in his arm from a through-and-through stab from a large kitchen knife that went into his chest. The amount of force necessary to clear through someone's arm and then through the chest, what other intent could he have had at that moment but to kill Joel Kennedy? It will be abundantly clear to you when you hear the evidence in this case. You'll also hear about some of the other collateral crimes that are associated with this that are for your consideration here. And that is burglary. He's charged with burglary or entering a residence with the intent to commit a felony. He clearly entered the residence. You're able to see the area in Sabrina's room where he entered without their consent. They weren't home. Broke through a bedroom window. And obviously his crimes that he committed in terms of killing them and attempting to kill Joel are his felony offenses that he attempted. That was his intent in entering that residence that day. And then finally, there are 2 counts of bail jumping. Meaning Mr. Cayer was on bond in 2 other criminal cases. One of the standard conditions of bond in those cases is that you cannot commit any other criminal offenses while on bond. You can be released from custody, but there is a statutory condition that you cannot commit crimes while released on bond. So if you find Mr. Cayer guilty of committing the homicides and committing the burglary, committing the attempted homicide, if you find him guilty of any one of those, he naturally is also guilty of the bail jumping because he was on bond in those 2 criminal cases at this time. You will also hear about a jury instruction about reasonable doubt, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest burden in the criminal justice system. It's the highest burden in our entire justice system. That the state must prove to you that there is evidence to support each element of these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. We are confident that if you listen carefully to the evidence in this case, and you give a fair and impartial consideration of that evidence, that you will clearly find that the state has met its burden of proof with respect to each of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is what we ask of you here today. That you give a fair and impartial consideration of all of the evidence that will come before you over the next few days, that you consider it carefully in deliberations, and that you render the only verdict that we think is possible in this case, the only verdict, the only reasonable inference in this case, the only reasonable hypothesis in this case, is that Mr. Cayer committed these crimes and that he intended to commit these crimes, and that you will find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lasay. Mr. Cotton?
Is it okay to move this barricade when I talk to the jury, Your Honor?
Well, I can't guarantee we have our social distancing otherwise, but I think that for that limited purpose, if Mr. Johnson is okay with that,
I'm
you
fine
could
with
just
that.
pull it right to the front of the table then.
Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I wanted to start by thanking everybody for being here for this very important case. As the state indicated, you're here today to decide whether Mr. Cayer is responsible for these crimes, and I'm not going to get into the details of the offenses because you just heard a little bit of an overview. What I do want to mention is that opening statements are not evidence. Opening statements are simply the, and that's why you're not taking notes right now, opening statements are simply the observations of the attorneys. Evidence is what you hear in court. Evidence is what you hear from witnesses who take the stand. Evidence is what you hear when, whether it's an expert witness or a police officer witness, evidence is what you hear when an individual comes in here and offers their observations to you. We have a system of justice in this country that I think is the best in the world, and it's a very important system of justice. Defendants are presumed innocent at all stages of the proceedings. You probably heard about that in your personal lives, and we talked about that a little bit in jury selection. But every defendant is presumed innocent under the law. And that presumption of innocence remains with the defendant, with Mr. Cayer. The presumption of innocence remains throughout the whole trial, only until such time if the state is able to introduce evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. The reason why we have such a standard is because defendants are not required to prove their innocence. In other words, some systems have a requirement that a person come into court and start putting on evidence to show why they didn't do a particular crime. That's not the system that our founding fathers created here in America. They created a system where a defendant is presumed innocent, and you as jurors, despite what you might hear in an opening statement, are required to follow that very important principle and remember at all times that you are to presume that Mr. Cayer is innocent of these very, very serious crimes. We'd ask that as you sit here through this trial, this will be a multi-day trial, we're sure of that. I think the parties will work very hard to make sure we can move the case along for you as efficiently as possible, because it's important that things that we can agree on, we'll try our best to agree on those things, but there will be a number of points that we don't agree on, of course, in which time there will be cross-examination of witnesses. Jacob Cayer is the defendant here. Back on Friday when we did our jury selection, we talked a little bit about a defendant testifying, and I had mentioned during jury selection that, of course, a defendant has a constitutional right not to testify. That is a right. So a defendant has sort of two rights in that vein: the right to choose not to testify, but the other end of that coin is that the defendant has the right to testify. And this may very well be a case where, in addition to cross-examining the state's witnesses that they put on, this may very well be a case where Mr. Cayer will choose to testify and give his version of events for you folks. So I want you to keep an open mind throughout the entire case that you're hearing, because the state has the right to go first. They're the ones that get to introduce the first witnesses. But then we have an opportunity after the state has, they say, rested, we have an opportunity to present witnesses if we might choose to do so, including in a second phase of the trial if it ever got to that. But of course, in the first phase of the trial, Mr. Cayer as a witness testifying about his version of events. The most important thing from our perspective, folks, is that you keep an open mind throughout these proceedings. We hope that all of you can follow your oath very seriously by remembering that Mr. Cayer is presumed innocent at all stages of the proceeding, keeping an open mind about what you're hearing, and realizing that in many cases, you've heard the expression, there's two sides to every story. I would go so far as to say there's oftentimes a bigger picture of what's happening, and sometimes we have to think very carefully about what the bigger picture is when we're making the decisions that are so important in this case. And I would urge you to remember that there's always a bigger picture at play that we believe will, by the end of these proceedings, the end of this week, will be evident to you folks, and you'll find Mr. Cayer not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton. Is the state prepared to call its first witness? Yes. Mr. Cotton, Mr. Lassay. My version of 601, if you could compare that to the standard and make sure you're comfortable with it. The standard has an area where it says you can provide a complete description of the two phases if desired, but we've provided pretty significant information on that in the jury questionnaire, in voir dire, and I didn't think more than what is in this instruction is necessary unless you want more.
I'm fine with this.
Okay.
We're fine with that.
And the other issue, the legal issue that we're going to talk about later, there was a summary or some information that you were going to see if Mr. Cotton agreed to being provided to me?
He did, Judge.
He agreed to that? All right,
Yes.
thank you. All right, I'm just going to take a moment and I'll be back.
Hearing flicker here.
Which one will be?
So this is when I get them.
I don't think there's any other issue we need to address, is there? No. All right. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant, Jacob P. Cayer, has entered 2 pleas to the charges, which are 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, burglary, and 2 counts of bail jumping. And those 2 pleas are not guilty and not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The law requires that the issues raised by the 2 pleas be decided in a continuous trial that is separated into 2 phases. Your verdict will be taken at the end of each phase. You are to consider only the issues presented to you during each phase. You are not to consider any issues other than those presented to you for each verdict. In the first phase of this trial, you will be asked to determine whether the defendant is guilty of the charges, including 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, burglary, and 2 counts of bail jumping. You will make this determination solely upon the facts which deal with the actual incident alleged in the information. During this first phase, you will not be asked to determine whether, at the time of the incident, the defendant was suffering from mental disease or defect. If, after the first phase of the trial, you find the defendant guilty, if after the first phase of the trial you find the defendant not guilty, the trial will be over. If you find the defendant guilty, the trial will move to a second phase. During the second phase, you will be asked to determine whether the defendant is responsible for criminal conduct. Wisconsin law provides that a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if, at the time the crime was committed, the person had a mental disease or defect and as a result lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct or to conform the conduct to the requirements of the law. If the trial proceeds into this second phase, you will be instructed more fully as to your duties at that time. We will now begin the first phase of the trial. I again caution you that this first phase is concerned solely with the question of whether the defendant committed the crimes, including 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, burglary, and 2 counts of bail jumping as set forth in the information. We will now begin with the state calling its first witness to elicit evidence on the issue of guilt. Mr. Lassay, your first witness.
Your Honor, in lieu of a witness, the state is going to play the 911 calls. It's my understanding that the parties have stipulated that the 911 calls can be entered without the need of someone from dispatch to confirm them.
Yes.
All right, so that's the agreement. Go ahead, Mr. Lassay.
Thank you. The first call, these are 2 calls. The first is very short, and essentially it was like a 911 hang-up call. They are being played in the order in which they were received by dispatch.
Reached the voicemail box of 26.
They're trying to kill my family.
Okay, what's going on? What's the address?
They're in David Riverdale Drive, Florida.
Okay, I need you to do that one more time.
358 Riverdale Drive.
3058 Riverdale Drive?
1368.
1368?
Oh, shit. He's trying to break into the house now.
Okay, sir, you said 1368 Riverdale Drive?
1368.
Okay, and someone's trying to break into your house?
They're only looking. I'm standing here. I'm bleeding out.
Okay, does he have a weapon?
Yes.
What does he have?
A knife. They'll be running outside the door.
Okay, do you know who he is?
His name is Jacob.
Hello?
Let him out there right away, please.
Okay, you guys have any, can you get out of your house?
I tried to get out, but he cleaned up.
What is he doing?
He's trying to get out.
Okay, how many people are in your house right now?
3, 4, including them.
Okay, and can you guys, where is he right now?
What?
Where is the male?
I don't know.
Okay, where did he stab you?
In the arm, I'm bleeding out really bad.
Okay, and okay, is anyone else in your family injured?
Yes, my girlfriend and her mom are injured.
What happened to them?
They got stabbed, I believe.
Okay. Where are they right now? Are they by you?
No, I left myself in the bathroom.
Okay, and you don't know, can you hear them at all?
No.
Okay, do you have a description of him?
Tall, blonde hat, he's got long brown hair.
Okay.
Black shirt, blue jeans.
Okay, he has long brown hair with black shirt and blue jeans.
Yeah, so black hat.
Okay. Alright, and do you know if he came in the vehicle or on foot?
I do not know.
Okay. And you didn't see it. How did he get into the house? Does anyone know him?
I don't know. He was here when we got here.
Okay, how long ago did this start happening?
It was right when we got home, so about 15 minutes ago.
Okay. And you don't know where they were stabbed at all?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay, to take a deep breath, okay, we're getting you a lot of help. Do you have any other descriptions? Did you have any tattoos? What type of knife did you have?
I don't know. I think it was just a kitchen knife.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Did you hear anyone else in the house? Do you know if there was another person that had a knife or anything?
No, I don't know.
Okay. And when is the last time that you saw your girlfriend and her mom?
My girlfriend was fighting them off in the garage. I don't know if she's okay or not.
Okay. How long long ago was that, do you know?
About 5 minutes. I think he might be gone.
Okay. Call him. Okay. But you didn't hear, you don't know where the other 2 females are in the house, correct? And you don't know
No, I
who
don't know.
it is?
No, I don't.
Okay. And you said he had long brown hair and he was wearing, his clothing was a black shirt and blue jeans?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And you didn't notice any tattoos or any scars on his face or anything?
No.
Okay. All right, and then when you came into your house, did you notice a vehicle that was out of place on the road or anything?
No.
Okay. All right, and you don't think you knew him either?
It's my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend.
It's your girlfriend's ex-boyfriend?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know his name?
Jake? I don't know his last name.
What is his first name, you think?
Jacob?
Okay, what is your girlfriend's name?
Sabrina?
Sabrina?
Yes.
What's her last name?
Teague. Teague.
Okay. Okay. All right. And you're still locked in the bathroom?
Yes, I am. I'm going to stay here, so it's house here.
Okay. All right, you're doing a good job at calling, okay? And you were stabbed in the arm, you said?
Yes.
Okay, how was
I'm
it?
lost a lot of blood.
Okay, you're losing a lot of blood?
Yeah, I got a towel on it, but it's dripping with blood.
Okay. The paramedics will be able to clean that up, okay? Make sure you put it up.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Do you hear them there?
No.
Okay, I'm going to stay on the phone with you until you hear officers, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know if any of the doors are unlocked?
No, they're not.
Okay. Doors aren't locked?
They are not locked. They are locked.
Okay, is there a garage code that they can use to get in?
Yes, there's a garage door.
What is that? What is
Wait, no, there's no trouble.
Okay. Do you have a spare key outside or anything?
There is a spare key by the front door underneath lock.
Okay. Okay, and did he... Okay, and you said he didn't show you a gun, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
The suspect did not have a gun?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Okay, do you have any idea where he lives?
No.
Okay. Okay. And do you hear anyone yet?
No, I don't.
Okay.
They need to have us kick the door in.
You said okay, you're saying if they need to, they can kick the door in?
Yes.
Okay. What is your name?
Joel, Joel.
And your last name?
Kennedy.
Okay. I know, like I said, they're going to be able to clean you up, okay? I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, it fucking hurts.
I believe it. Do you hear anyone outside yet?
No, I don't hear anybody.
Okay. Okay. What type of vehicle should be in your driveway?
A gray Chevy Cobalt.
Okay. Is that
Are
it?
they here?
We do have officers in the area, yes, but I'm going to wait for them to get in the house to disconnect, okay?
Okay.
You're not with your girlfriend. You're not sure what type of vehicle that male would be driving if he had it?
I do not know, no.
Okay. And then was it your mom that was in the house with you, or was it your girlfriend?
So it's my girlfriend's mom.
Do you know what's her name?
Heesun, Heesun.
Okay.
Teague.
Okay. Teague?
Teague. Teague.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, not a problem. Just, how are you doing?
I'm in a lot of pain, other than that, I'm okay.
Okay. And is the bleeding getting control at all?
I have a towel on
Okay.
it. Holy shit.
What's going on?
I just looked at it, already cut. All I did was look at the towel and started spraying.
Yep, don't look at it at all. Okay, just keep it covered until paramedics get there.
Okay.
Okay, and do you have
My hand is numb. What?
do you have pressure on it to stop the bleeding?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. And where is it? On your arm?
I'm at left arm, yes.
Okay. Okay. You're doing good, Joel, okay?
Yeah.
And where was the last time that you saw the female's mom?
I don't know. I think she's in the shower. The bathtub.
What bathroom are you in? Is there 2 stories or?
It's 2 stories. There's 2 bathrooms on the first floor.
Okay.
I'm in the bathroom that's in the first back of the house.
Okay. And so there's 2. You think you're in the back of the house bathroom and she might be in the front?
Yeah, she doesn't have arms in the front bathroom. I believe.
Okay. All right, Joel. Have you heard anything yet?
No.
Okay.
I think he's gone though.
You what?
I think he's gone.
Oh, that's fine. I'm going to stay on the phone with you, like I said, until officers come and approach you. And you,
Okay.
so you don't have any weapons on you, do you?
I got my knife.
Okay, I need you to put that away.
I put it on the counter in the bathroom.
You what?
I put it on the counter in the bathroom.
Okay.
Should I put it in the drawer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
I know. They're trying to make sure that you're safe, okay?
Are they here? Is there a way to find out?
Yeah, they are, but they're going on the perimeter, okay? They're just making sure that no one else is in the house and that you stay safe. So that's why I'm staying on the phone with you, and we're going to make sure that that you cover that wound, okay?
Okay. He might still be inside if he's going to try to jump off the back. I know the night.
What did you say? Joel, what?
Inside.
Okay, are you still there, Joel?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, what did you say about the name?
He might try to jump out of the bathroom when they come in.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. It's good that you called right away, okay? Just remember that too.
Yeah.
Okay. And how much your bleeding doing?
It's still bleeding heavily.
Okay.
And my arm is numb.
Okay, just hold on 1 second, okay, Joel?
Yeah.
Okay, Joel, I need you to walk towards the front door to the front entrance. Let me know if you're leaving, okay?
Are they inside?
Yeah, they're asking you to walk towards the front door, so they've already secured the house, okay? Let me know when you're going to open up the door. Did you open up the door?
No.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay, are you getting out now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, just stay on the phone with me, okay?
Okay.
Send this way out, Sam.
Could you please put out me? My girlfriend is the mom. Where's your mom at? In the bathroom, I believe.
Are you all with the officer right now, Joel?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm going to let you talk to them, okay?
She's son, I think she's in bed. I think she's dead.
All right, Rachel? Your Honor, this is another issue for the evidence for exhibits. The parties had discussed turning over the electronic evidence, including the audio, the video, and photos that will be displayed on a thumb drive. A copy has been provided to the defense, and then we were going to refer to it by the folder name. It's generically named. We would move to mark the thumb drive as Exhibit 1, and then there are subfolders A through N, and then the photos or the evidentiary items are sub-numbered on there.
So what is the number of these two 911 calls?
These two 911 calls are Exhibit 1, A1, and Exhibit 1, A2.
All right. So are you moving the court to receive those two exhibits at this time?
We are, Your Honor.
Any objection? All right. I'll receive Exhibit 1A1 and A2
Thank you.
at this time. And so just so the record's very clear, A1 is the first 911 call that you played that you referred to as a hang-up call?
Correct.
And A2 is the lengthy call we just heard?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Are you calling a witness now?
They would call Joel Kennedy.
All right. Mr. Kennedy, if you'd please come up to the witness stand. Once you step up onto the platform, if you'd please raise your right hand to be placed under oath.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Joel Kennedy, Joelkennedy.
Thank you.
Thank you. What we're going to allow you to do, Mr. Kennedy, is testify with your mask removed and then wearing a face shield. Thank you. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, Mr. Kennedy, is that black box that's in front of you with the red light, that's the microphone. If you can kind of move your chair up so that you're basically touching the counter, because if your shield is kind of over top of the microphone, it picks your voice up better. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Kennedy, can you tell us how old you are?
26?
And are you from the Green Bay area originally?
No.
Where are you from?
Milwaukee?
And do you live in that area now?
Yes.
At some point in time, you were residing up in the Green Bay area, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us how that came about?
An ex of mine?
And that's not Sabrina?
No.
Okay. At some point in time, did you meet a person by the name of Sabrina Teague?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us how that happened?
Meet me?
And did you start a relationship with her?
Yes.
Do you know about what time, what year you began that relationship with Sabrina?
December 2015?
And how did your relationship progress with Sabrina?
It went really well, and we were trying to get everything set up and start life together.
So you dated her?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did you live with Sabrina?
Yes.
When did that happen?
About a month after we got together.
And where did you live with her?
With her in her house.
And do you know the address of that house?
1368 Riverdale Drive.
Who else lived there with you?
Her mother.
And what was her mother's name?
Heesun.
Did she have a nickname? Her
Sunny.
mother? Sunny? Is that what everybody called her, Sunny?
Yes.
You too?
Yes.
And you said that shortly after you were dating, you were living with her, everything was going pretty well in your relationship?
Yes.
Joel, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 1B1. Turn up to the, can you see it on this screen in front of you here?
Just so the jury knows, whatever is being projected on the large drop-down screen is also showing on the TV screen that's in front of myself, and the court reporter and the witness can see that as well. It's in front of defense counsel table. Are you able to see the TV screen in front of you, Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Kennedy, can you identify what's in that photograph?
That is the house?
That's the house where you resided with Sabrina and Sonny Teague.
Yes.
And were you living there in June of 2016?
Yes.
Were you working at that time?
Yes.
Where were you working?
Burger King.
Do you know about the date range of your employment with that Burger King?
January, I believe, until July or August.
Is that January 2016?
2015. No, yes, 2016, sorry.
Did you start Burger King before or after you started dating Sabrina?
After.
All right. So January of 2016. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how long had you resided at that 1368 residence?
About 6 months.
During your time living there, had you ever seen or known a person by the name of Jacob Cayer to be at that house?
No.
Joel, I'm going to direct your attention specifically to June 7th of 2016. Do you remember that day?
Yes.
Were you living in the 1368 Riverdale Drive residence at that time?
Yes.
Had you moved out or lived at a different residence at all kind of immediately prior to that?
Yes, I did.
Where were you living immediately kind of prior to that? What's the time frame?
With a friend, and for a couple months.
So is that in like the spring of 2016?
No, that would be before. Winter 2015.
Oh, okay. So this is before you moved into the residence entirely?
Yes.
Okay. And then once you moved into 1368, you were living there essentially continuously until June 7th of 2016?
Yes.
On June 7th, 2016, do you recall what time you left the house that day?
I believe it was 12 or 1 p.m.
And where were you headed at that time?
Work.
And that is the Burger King?
Yes.
Where was that Burger King located?
In Howard.
And so when you went to work, 12 or 1, how long were you supposed to work that day?
I believe I was supposed to be there until 9 or 10.
How did you get to work?
Sabrina drove me.
Did you have a car at that time?
No.
Was it typical for Sabrina to bring you to and from work?
Yes.
And you think you were supposed to work until about 9 p.m. that night?
Yes.
Did you end up working until 9 p.m.?
No, I was released early.
Is that typical that you would occasionally get released early?
No.
Do you know what the reason was in that particular day?
No.
Did you have plans after work that night?
Yes, we were going to have a friend come over and watch some TV and movies.
And when you say we, you mean you and Sabrina?
Yes.
Do you know what either Sabrina and Sonny's plans were for that day?
No, I do not.
Was Sabrina working at that time?
I believe so.
Where was she working?
Perkins.
Do you know if Sonny had a job?
I do not think so.
So what time did you actually get off of work that day?
I believe 7:30.
And how did you leave work that day?
Sabrina picked me up.
And what car was Sabrina driving?
Her vehicle.
What kind of car was that? Do you remember?
Chevy Cobalt.
I'm going to direct your attention back to Exhibit 1B1. Do you see that vehicle in the photograph?
Yes.
There's only one vehicle in the photograph, is that fair to say?
Yes.
All right, so it's the vehicle parked in the driveway?
Yes.
Where did you go after Sabrina picked you up from work?
We went to Walmart to grab some food.
To grab some what?
To grab some food.
Did you pick up any other items while you were there?
I don't believe so.
Do you know about what time you left Walmart?
7:45.
And what happened after you left Walmart?
We went home.
So and did you go anywhere else in between from leaving work, Walmart, and then home?
No.
And do you know about what time you got back to 1368 Riverdale Drive?
About 7:50, 8?
7:50 or 8?
Yes.
When you arrived home, where did she park the car?
In the driveway, right in front of the garage door.
So is it consistent with the photograph that's being displayed that we previously addressed?
Yes.
Is that typically where Sabrina would park?
Yes.
Did Sonny have a vehicle?
Yes.
What kind of vehicle was that?
Gray Chevy HHR?
When you arrived home, was that vehicle at the residence?
Yes.
Where was it?
In the garage,
Do you know which stall of those 3 stalls?
the middle stall.
And you think that vehicle was in the middle stall when you arrived?
Yes.
Were there any other vehicles on scene that you observed?
No.
May I ask you if you can recall specifically how you entered the home that night?
He went in through the garage and the side door to the garage.
So you walked in the garage door, and then is there an entryway from the garage into the home?
Yes.
And that's the entryway that you took?
Yes.
Was that typical?
Yes.
Did you utilize the front door often?
No.
When you arrived through the garage, did you notice anything unusual upon entering the residence?
Yes, there was a bottle of water spilled on the floor.
Well, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 1B2. It's another photograph, and I'm going to ask you to identify that photograph.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment just because I want to ask the jury if they can see clearly. It seems like when I turn off another light, you can see the screen much more clearly, but I don't know then if you can see the witness well enough. So I don't know if I should keep turning the light on and off, leave the light on, or leave it off. If you want me to leave it off, raise your hand. All right, so if I turn the light off and leave it off and at some point you need me to turn it back on, just raise your hand, all right? All right, go ahead, Mr. Lissay.
Joel, I'm going to ask you to identify what you see in this photograph, which is 1B2.
That is the garage entrance.
You'll notice on that garage entrance there appears to be quite a lot of chaos, blood evidence, things of that nature. Was that there when you arrived at the residence?
Objection, reading, Your Honor.
Can you rephrase the question?
There appear to be a lot of stains on the floor. There's a shovel tipped over. There are stains on the wall. Did you observe those stains and the shovel on the floor when you first entered the residence?
No.
So I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B3. Can you identify that photograph?
Yes, that is the kitchen and dining room.
Of the residence at 1368?
Yes.
And there's a door in the back in the middle of that. Can you identify what that door is?
That leads to the laundry room.
And then there's a door to the right of that. What is that door?
That is the garage door.
And is that the door that you entered when you came into the house that evening on June 7th?
Yes.
Do you recall if the door to the laundry room was open or closed when you arrived?
Closed.
What kind of door is the door to the laundry room?
Sliding door.
Is it typical for that door to be closed?
No.
Did you notice it when you initially came in the residence that it was closed?
No.
You'll also see some staining on the floor and what appears to be some disruption throughout the kitchen. Do you know, was that staining present when you initially entered the residence that night?
No.
So you did not see any staining on the floor when you first came in?
No.
So what happened then after you entered the residence?
What do you mean?
So what happened? I think you said you observed some water spilled on the floor. So then what happened?
The shower was running, and Sabrina went to go check on her mother and found her in the bathroom, and there were stains all over the floor, And then that is when he came out of the laundry room and attacked.
Did you go over to the bathroom to look to see what was in there at that time?
No, I did not.
I'm showing you, drawing your attention back to this photograph. That appears to be a kitchen island. Is that accurate?
Yes.
When you came in, where did you go?
I was on the other side of the island.
When you say the other side of the island, are you talking about the side where the table and chairs are, or the other side?
The other side.
And where did Sabrina go oriented on this photograph?
The side with the table and chairs.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B4. Can you describe what's in that photograph?
That is the fridge and the laundry room at the house.
There appears to be staining on the floor and the wall and on the refrigerator. Was that staining present when you entered the residence?
No.
And Joel, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B5. Can you identify that photograph and what it depicts?
That is the kitchen and the island.
Can you see the bathroom where Heesun was located in this photograph?
Yes.
And where is it on the photograph?
By the stairwell.
And which direction from the stairwell is it?
Towards the right.
Towards the right. So, can you see into the bathroom very well in this photograph?
No.
So, when you say that Sabrina went to go check on her mom, where did she go? Were you able to see the area where Sabrina went on this photograph?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jury in a little more detail?
She went back towards the back of the house on the stairwell, and then right there in the bathroom was right in front of the...
After Sabrina looked into that bathroom, what did Sabrina do?
She said, "Oh my God, Mom," and then opened her phone to call 911.
And did she stay in that area, or did she move at all?
She started walking back towards the door.
Towards the door that you had entered?
Yes.
And where are you while that is happening?
Standing by the island still.
On this photograph, the left or the right of the island?
Left.
There is some, what appears to be staining on the floor on the left side of the island. Was that staining present when you entered the home that day?
No.
So what happened after Sabrina said, "Oh my God," pulled out her phone, and then started walking toward your direction?
And he walked out of the laundry room and proceeded to attack us.
When you say he, who are you talking about?
Cayer.
And do you know his first name?
Jacob.
At this point, Your Honor, I'm going to ask if Mr. Kennedy can identify the individual who he knows as Jacob Cayer. Before Mr. Kennedy makes any identification, I'm going to ask that all of the members at council table and people in the first row remove their masks. Once everyone's mask is removed, Joel, I'm going to ask you if you see the person who you know as Jacob in court here today.
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Do you see him?
Yes, I do.
Could you indicate for the record where he is seated and what he is wearing?
There in a gray shirt.
I would ask the record reflect that he has identified the defendant.
The record will so reflect, and just for the record, when Mr. Kennedy said there, he pointed, I believe it was with his right hand, to the right, to defense counsel table. And so are you indicating you're pointing out the third person to the right on
Yes.
that table? All right, thank you. I'll also note for the record that 13 people removed their masks at that time. And now we'll all put their masks back on. Most already have. Thank you.
Do you recall who Mr. Cayer attacked first, you or Sabrina?
Sabrina.
And where was she located when Mr. Cayer attacked her?
On the other side of the island, by the chairs.
Do you know what he used to attack either of you?
A kitchen knife.
Could you see the knife in his hand?
Yes.
Do you know what hand it was in?
Right, I believe.
And did you actually see Mr. Cayer stab Sabrina?
Yes.
And you indicated that he attacked you as well. Do you know when that happened in relation to when he attacked Sabrina?
I believe he went after her first and then came over to attack me.
When he attacked you, where were you?
I was still standing on the other side of the island.
Were you standing roughly in the location where the staining is located?
Yes.
You said Sabrina had her phone out. What happened with the phone?
I believe he slapped it out of her hand.
And do you know if she actually successfully called 911?
I do not think so.
When Mr. Cayer attacked you, what happened?
I was standing by the island and he walked up and went to stab me, and then I put my arm up and the blade went through my arm and into my chest. And then I fell back and started kicking at him and punching.
And what did he do at that point when you started kicking at him and punching him?
I believe he kind of walked away and started going after Sabrina again.
What did you do?
I went out into the garage.
Through the same door that you had entered?
Yes.
What did you do when you got to the garage?
I went and I grabbed a shovel.
And once you grabbed the shovel, where did you go to grab the shovel in the garage?
On the other side of the garage.
That garage, when we looked in Exhibit 1B1, we could see that the garage has 3 stalls.
Yes.
Orienting from that photograph, what location of the garage was the shovel found in? I'll bring that photograph back up for you here.
The furthest right stall.
So the shovel was near there?
Yes.
So you ran across the entire garage to get it?
Yes.
When you grabbed that shovel, what did you do then?
They were following me out into the garage, fighting the entire time. And then I struck him, Cayer, with the shovel.
Where did you strike him?
I believe in the face.
And what happened then?
They fell down and I ran inside the house and locked the doors and called 911.
And when you called 911, where were Jacob and Sabrina?
In the garage still.
Do you know if they were standing or if they were on the ground or where they were?
I don't recall.
Do you know if Mr. Cayer still had the knife?
I believe so.
What were your emotions like at that time?
Fear. Terrified.
Joel, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B6. Can you identify what that photograph depicts?
That is the hallway leading to the bathroom and the bedrooms.
And is that where you headed after you closed the door to the garage?
Yes.
There is looks like a railing on the left. Where does that staircase go?
That leads to the basement.
What's in the basement?
That was mine and Sabrina's room and storage.
There's a door on the right in this photograph. What is in the door on the right?
That would be the bathroom.
Did you look in that bathroom on your way back to Heesun's bedroom?
Yes.
What did you see?
I saw a body wrapped in a blanket and stains all over the floor.
Did you spend much time going in that bathroom and looking with any
No.
specificity? Could you see who it was?
No.
Did you make an assumption in your mind about who it was?
Yes.
And who did you believe it to be?
Heesun.
So the doorway all the way at the end of the hall, what is that doorway?
That is the door to Heesun's room.
Is that where you went?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as 1B6. 7, what is depicted in this photograph?
Heesun's room.
There's a door immediately to the right. Do you know what that door is?
I believe that is a closet.
And then there's a door in the back on the right, a doorway that you can see. Where does that doorway lead to?
That is the bathroom.
And is that where you went?
Yes.
When you came in through the garage, do you remember if you locked the garage door?
I don't believe I did.
When you came into Heesun's bedroom, do you remember if you locked that door?
Yes, I did.
And when you came into the bathroom, Heesun's bathroom, did you lock that door as well?
Yes.
What did you do when you got into the bathroom?
I grabbed a towel to wrap up my arm and called 911.
And did you just stay in the bathroom then, Ken, while you were on the phone with 911?
Yes.
Do you recall where in that bathroom you were standing?
Up against the door.
How was your body positioned?
I had my back up against the door and I was standing.
While you were in the bathroom, do you recall if anybody else came into the house?
Yes.
What do you recall?
I believe that Cayer came back inside and tried to get into the bathroom.
How do you know that?
Because I could hear him outside of the door.
You know for sure it was him?
No.
But you suspected it was him?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B8. Can you identify what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, that is the bathroom.
There is what appears to be some staining on the floor of the bathroom. Did you observe that staining on the floor of the bathroom before you entered the room?
No.
Based on where you were standing and the nature of your injury, do you believe that staining came from your injury?
Yes.
And is that staining consistent with where you were standing in the bathroom?
Yes.
Do you recall making that phone call to 911?
Yes, I do.
And you recall talking to the dispatcher and remaining on the line until officers arrived?
Yes.
And did officers eventually arrive on scene?
Yes.
When they arrived, do you recall dispatch telling you to leave the residence?
Yes.
And what did you do?
I walked through the house and out of the front door.
And did you walk back out the garage door where you came in, or did you walk out a different door?
I walked up a different door.
And that was the front door to the house?
Yes.
And were officers waiting there to meet you?
Yes.
And then what happened after you met with officers?
I was put into an ambulance and rushed to the hospital.
Do you recall which hospital you were at?
Felon.
What was the nature of the injuries that you suffered?
There was a severed main artery, several severed tendons and nerves. And that is all that I know.
What about the injury to your chest? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, and that was just a lesion.
Do you recall what you were wearing that night?
Yes, I was wearing my black khaki pants and my Burger King work shirt.
Joel, do you recall whether or not you had any weapons on your person that night?
Yes.
What did you have?
I had a pocket knife.
Is it typical for you to carry a pocket knife?
Yes.
Do you recall, did you use that knife at all during this incident?
No, I did not.
Do you recall dispatch having a conversation with you about that knife?
Yes.
What was the nature of that conversation?
They asked me if I had any weapons, and I told them that I had my pocket knife, and they told me to take it out of my pocket and leave it in the bathroom.
Did you do that?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at Exhibit 1B9. Can you see that knife in that photograph?
Yes.
Where is it located?
Towards the front left of the drawer.
And 1B10, can you identify what's present in that photograph?
Yes, that is my pocket knife.
It appears to be on a tissue, I don't mean to lead you, I don't know whether that's a tissue or not. Was that white tissue-like object, was that yours or was that in the drawer?
That was in the drawer.
And again, did you utilize that knife at all during the course of this incident?
No, I did not.
And you did, in fact, leave it there to be recovered or photographed by law enforcement?
Yes.
Joel, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1B11. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
That is mine and Sabrina's room.
Okay. And which room of the home is that located in?
That was downstairs in the basement, the first door on the right.
And that's where the two of you stayed together?
Yes.
Don't mean any offense by this, but it's kind of messy. Is that sort of the normal state of affairs in that room?
Yes.
Joel, I'm going to ask you to identify Exhibit 12. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
That is one of our windows.
Yeah, I'm going to return to photograph number 11. The window in 12, is that photograph present on this photograph, photograph 11?
Yes.
And which window is it?
That would be that one.
So I believe you're pointing to the top left-hand side of photograph 11. Is that accurate?
Yes.
In number 11, that window is covered. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm going to return to photograph 12. It appears that there is some grass or plants on the bottom of that, and it appears that the window is broken. To the best of your recollection, prior to June 7th, 2016, did the window area look like that?
No.
Was it broken to your knowledge at all?
No.
Joel, you indicated that you were wearing your Burger King shirt that night. I'm going to ask you to take a look at photograph 1B13. What's depicted in that photograph?
That is my work shirt.
That's the shirt you were wearing on the night of this incident?
Yes.
Now, Joel, I know this might be difficult, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this might be difficult, but I'm going to show you some photographs that depict your injury, okay?
Yes.
I'm showing you 1B14. Do you know what's depicted in that photograph?
That is my arm.
Is that what it looked like after the incident with Mr. Cayer on June 7th of 2016?
Yes.
And I think you indicated that the knife went directly through your arm. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Is there a hole on the other side that's not depicted on this photograph?
Yes.
And that required surgical intervention?
Yes.
Joel, I'm showing you 1B15. What's depicted in that photograph?
My chest and face?
Does that photograph accurately depict the injury to your chest?
Yes.
And in 1B16, can you describe what's in that photograph?
The wound on my chest?
And again, does that accurately depict the injury that you suffered in this incident?
Yes.
And you indicated what treatment was required for that injury?
I had to go under for surgery, and they sewed my arm back together, and I had 3 stitches in my chest.
Okay. Joel, as we were having our conversation here today, you're talking to the jury about what happened to you. You called the defendant Cayer. Did you know Jacob Cayer by first and last name on June 7th of 2016?
No, I did not. Did you know his last name?
No. You did know his first name, though?
Yes.
Had you met him previously?
Once.
Where did that occur?
At Walmart.
Do you know about when that was?
About a month prior to June 7th.
And what was the nature of that meeting?
Him and Sabrina got into an argument about something, and then we left after that.
I presume at some point, based on that argument and your follow-up conversation with Sabrina, you learned that his name was Jake and that he was Sabrina's ex-boyfriend?
Yes.
When Mr. Cayer jumped out of that laundry room, did you immediately recognize him as Sabrina's ex-boyfriend?
No, I did not.
When did you come to recognize him more specifically that night?
When she called his name out.
So Sabrina actually called in Jake during the incident.
Yes.
And then based on what she said and then your subsequent observations, you were able to determine that it was her ex-boyfriend, Jake?
Yes.
Mr. Cayer say anything to you while this attack was happening?
No.
Anything at all?
No.
Could you see his face when he came out of the laundry room?
Yes.
And what was he wearing?
I believe a black t-shirt, a hat, and jeans.
The hat, was it like a baseball cap or what was it?
Like a stocking cap.
And what color was the hat?
Black.
But his face was not covered.
No.
You were able to see it clearly?
Yes.
What did it look like?
Plain.
And again, to the best of your knowledge, Mr. Cayer had never been to that house while you were living there?
No.
And the only time you ever met him was at that Walmart incident earlier?
Yes.
Joel, do you recall talking to law enforcement after you were brought to the hospital?
Yes.
You know about how many times you talked to law enforcement?
I believe 3 different times.
How soon after the incident did that occur?
About right before I went into the surgery, so about half an hour
Half an hour after what?
after the incident.
Half hour after the incident or half an hour after you got to the hospital?
After the incident.
And then, did you talk to law enforcement subsequent times at the hospital again?
Yes.
In preparation for the court here today, do you have an opportunity to review any of the statements or the information that you had provided to law enforcement?
Yes.
And did you note anything about that information that you provided to law enforcement that was consistent or inconsistent with what you said today?
Yes, they were inconsistent.
Were they substantially inconsistent?
No.
Well, do you recall some of the inconsistencies?
No, I do not, but just certain wordings and certain sayings were different than other statements.
The information that you provided to the jury today, is that the information that you remember to the best of your ability?
Yes.
And do you recall emotionally what you were like when you got to the hospital?
I was scared, in pain, still terrified.
Do you remember what shoes you were wearing when you came to the residence that day?
No, I do not.
Do you remember if you took your shoes off prior to going into the house?
Yes, I did.
Do you know where?
On the porch leading to the door.
Was that typical?
Yes.
Was it a no shoes house generally?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you just 2 last photographs. 1B17. I asked you to take a look at that photograph in 1B17. There's a shoe, or appears to be a shoe, in that photograph. To the best of your recollection, is that your shoe?
No.
Do you know if that was Sabrina's shoe? Did you ever see her wearing that shoe?
I do not think so.
I'm just going to show you 1B18's close-up of that same shoe. Does that change your opinion at all, whether that was yours or Sabrina's?
No.
Just a brief follow-up, Joel. Do you recall, are you able to have any specific recollection of where Mr. Cayer stabbed Sabrina?
No, I believe all over.
Did you see him stab her multiple times?
Yes.
And Joel, I want to ask you one last question. It's probably a little bit uncomfortable, but have you ever been convicted of a crime before?
Yes.
How many times?
Once.
All right. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton?
Good morning, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You were asked about...
All right. We just need a minute to figure out those microphones.
Is that coming through okay?
Did you have sound on your computer at all?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. It seems like it's better.
Okay. Good morning, sir. You were asked questions about by the prosecutor about inconsistent statements. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you said that your statements were inconsistent. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Meaning that, and you gave 3 different statements to the police. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And then we have a 4th statement here in court, right?
Yes.
And actually, more statements were made because you prepared with the district attorney's office for trial, right?
Yes.
In other words, you sat down with them and discussed what you would testify to.
Yes.
Okay. And you've talked to others about this over time as the years have gone by, fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. People have wanted to know what happened, and you've shared what's happened, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, regarding the inconsistent statements, were you... I would just want to explore that a little bit further. I'm holding up here something that... does this look familiar? Can you see from where you're sitting?
Yes.
What am I holding? What do I appear to be holding up?
That is the first statement.
Your first statement.
Yes.
Meaning...
I think I'm going to need you to approach and have them identify that.
Okay. I mean, I'd introduce it.
Yes, that is my first statement.
So do you want to mark that?
Not really. You want to do it, but...
I think it should match up when you're trying to identify something.
This was your... you guys know what I'm talking about, right? And this was the statement that 10:17 p.m. You would agree with that?
Yes.
And you recognize your signature on it?
Yes.
So that scribble over here?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's been marked as exhibit number 2?
Yes. Now, you had a chance to look at this statement again when you were preparing for trial with the district attorney's office, fair to say?
Yes.
And that's when you noticed inconsistencies, right?
Yes.
Because you were rereading this and also thinking back on what you remembered, right?
Yes.
And it's fair to say 4 years, a little bit more than 4 years have gone by since the incident, right?
Yes.
Now, this statement was produced while you were at St. Vincent's Hospital, right?
Yes.
And when you had those wounds that we had seen in the pictures, right?
Yes.
So, and it's only 1 page, right?
Yes.
I'd like to talk to you about some of the inconsistencies, okay? First of all, you've testified today that about what happened, right?
Yes.
And it's your version that Jacob was responsible for this, right?
Yes.
And we agree you came in through the garage. At least that's your testimony. You came in through the garage, right?
Yes.
And if we orient ourselves with the pictures, I believe you'd come into the kitchen. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And today you testified that Sabrina your recollection is that Sabrina walked down to the bathroom and noticed her mother, right?
Yes.
And in your written statement, you had indicated me and Sabrina entered the bathroom. Would you agree with that?
I guess I'm going to object to the extent that we very briefly had the opportunity to see that statement through plexiglass.
would just say if he doesn't, we'll refresh his recollection as we ordinarily would. I'm asking if he recalls.
Let me ask you to restate the question, because frankly, the question was a bit convoluted, and depending on how one interprets that question.
In your written statement, you said, when me and Sabrina entered the bathroom, we saw blood everywhere. Would you agree that you made that written statement?
Yes, I do.
And today you've testified that Sabrina was the one who entered the bathroom, not you. Fair to say?
Yes.
So that's one inconsistency, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you, in your written statement, you stated that, quote, Jake started attacking me with the knife. I fell to the floor. You remember that?
Yes.
And today you've testified that Sabrina was the first one who was attacked by Jake. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
That's another inconsistency, right?
Yes.
And after Jake attacked, in your written statement, you say that Sabrina was attacked second, right?
Yes.
Okay, but the way you're remembering it today is that Sabrina was attacked first and then you were attacked second.
Yes.
I want to try to understand a little bit more clearly what happened in this, or what you say happened. You had been dating Sabrina since at least, I think, December-ish of 2015, right?
Yes.
And the two of you met however you met, and you moved into her house fairly quickly, right?
Yes.
Is that because you had no place else to live, or you just immediately had a very close relationship?
We had a close relationship.
And the bedroom we saw the pictures of downstairs was where the two of you would reside, right?
Yes.
And you would agree that Sabrina's mother, Heesun, did not want you living in the house. Would you agree with that?
No.
You don't agree with that?
No.
Well, she was upset that you were, when you moved into the house, wasn't she?
No, she was not.
Was she happy that you moved into the house?
She was indifferent.
But you weren't working when you moved in, right?
No.
Meaning correct, you didn't have a job when you first moved in, right?
Yes.
And no source of income when you moved into the house, right?
Yes.
Sabrina was working. She was at Perkins, right?
Yes.
So you're not working, Sabrina is working.
Yes.
And you're living in the house.
Yes.
And so to the extent you're eating and having shelter, that's because it's being provided to you within that home, right?
Yes.
But it's your testimony that Heesun, or Sonny as we'll call her, was indifferent to that.
Yes.
Okay. You didn't have any conflict with her about moving in and eating their food and living off them?
No.
Is it your testimony that Sonny liked you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you did have a knife on you, right?
Yes.
Why did you carry a knife with you?
I used them at work.
You worked at Burger King?
Yes.
And we saw a picture of that knife. Looks like a black folding knife, fair to say?
Yes.
Is that a work-issued knife?
No.
So you would carry that at Burger King while you worked?
Yes.
And then you would carry it in your pocket after you left Burger King?
Yes.
What was your job at Burger King?
I did everything.
Cook burgers?
Cook burgers, take orders, make the food, take out the garbage.
And which of those jobs did you require the knife for?
Breaking down boxes.
Okay, so if you had to break down a box, you had a knife for that.
Yeah.
And would you agree that this knife has a blade, right? We can't see it in the picture, but there would be a blade in there, right?
Yes.
And would you agree you also carry that knife with you for protection if you need it?
Yes.
Okay. It's not just, you didn't just get the knife for purposes of breaking down boxes at Burger King, right?
Yeah.
Right? The knife has other purposes if you need it, right?
Yes.
If someone attacks you, you have a knife available to repel the attack.
Yes.
Now, in the 6 months or so that you had been at this house, you never once saw Jake there, right?
No, I did not.
And would be completely unexpected to see Jake in the house that night, right?
Yes.
There's no reason for him to be there.
Yes.
No conflict had happened earlier that day that would cause him to be there.
No.
Sabrina picked you up from work and you guys went to Walmart to get some food, right?
Yes.
So in terms of what you were doing, it was as uneventful as an evening as you could imagine, right?
Yes.
Similarly, there had been no conflict between Jacob and Sonny.
Yes.
So you weren't aware of any conflict between the two of them where there was bad blood between him and Sonny?
No, it was not.
And again, during the 6 or 7 months, never once saw Jake at that house, right? Until you say the night of the stabbing.
Correct.
Now, and it's just so we're clear, you did have a cell phone at that time, right?
Yes.
And the police took that cell phone and did whatever they did with it, right?
Yes.
In fact, you gave permission for them to analyze it if they wanted, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you had had that phone for maybe a month or so, or a month or 2 months before this incident, would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And that phone would contain text messages, phone call history, things like that.
Yes.
And you also had a Facebook account, right?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that in your phone, you would access YouTube from your phone?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that the same day of this incident, you searched on YouTube? It's up to you. We can approach first, and if you want to excuse the jury, we can.
So I think for purposes of the record, there's a relevance objection. I'm going to overrule the objection.
My question for you was whether you were able to access YouTube also from your phone, right?
Yes.
And you would do that periodically?
Yes.
And the same day of this stabbing, you had searched the phrase famous last words. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
In fact, that was the last thing you searched right before the stabbing.
Yes.
And you were asked about that by the district attorney's office in preparation for this trial, weren't you?
Yes.
And you told them that it's a music video that you like.
Yes.
Called Famous Last Words.
Yes, it is a musical group.
What's the video about?
I don't recall.
Wait for a moment, sir.
Said he doesn't recall.
Well, I was going to sustain the objection, but is there any additional questions you tend to ask on that issue?
No.
All right. Then I don't think I need to worry about the answer. It's already in the record. All right.
Now, so we've already talked about Exhibit 2, which is your written statement, right?
Yes.
Which was written by law enforcement because you weren't in a position to write this, right?
Yes.
And you were also interviewed on video. You remember when they filmed you and interviewed you?
I do not.
Okay. Are you aware as you sit here today that you were video filmed as you made a statement?
Yes.
You know that, right?
Yes.
And you know that because the state and the prosecutors have shown you your video to show you what you said, right? Or is that not accurate?
That is not accurate.
Okay, how do you know you were filmed on, how do you know you were filmed? Did somebody provide you a copy of your tape?
No, but I was informed.
By who?
I believe Lieutenant Van Lennon.
Okay. And that's, he's here in court at the end of the prosecutor's table with the shaved head, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you watch that tape with him in preparation for your testimony?
No.
No? He just told you that there was one, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, you talked about an event at Walmart where you had run into Jacob at some point before this, right?
Yes.
But Sabrina never told you that Jacob would want to hurt her, right?
No, she did not.
She never said Jacob was dangerous.
No, I don't believe so.
That's something you would have remembered if she had told you that, right?
Yes.
So she never says he's dangerous, never says he'd want to hurt her, but you did have conversations about him because you saw him at Walmart, right?
Yes.
And that was about a month or so before the incident?
Yes.
Now, during this stabbing event, it's your testimony that Jacob is the one who did this, right? That's your testimony?
Yes.
And that he didn't say anything before or after the attack, right?
Yes.
No words.
No words at all.
And I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that you described how his face looked. Didn't they ask you how his face looked?
Yes.
And you said plain, right?
Yes.
Would another word for that be expressionless?
Yes.
Meaning, didn't look angry, you couldn't get any read out of it, could you?
Correct.
Nor are there any words being said, so that doesn't help you at all either, right?
Correct.
And let's go with what you remember today, your testimony, is that the initial confrontation happens in the kitchen area, right?
Yes.
Which, it's either Sabrina first or you first, depending on the written statement or today's testimony, right?
Yes.
But eventually, all three of you make it to the garage, right?
Yes.
And you first, right? You were the first one to go in the garage.
Yes.
And it's your testimony, Jacob just jumped out of the laundry room unexpectedly and started attacking Sabrina, right?
Yes.
You got into the garage.
Yes.
And then didn't keep running outside the home, right?
Correct.
Just stayed in the garage until Sabrina and Jake came out the door.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand how it unfolded. You're watching as the two of them are struggling coming down those steps, right?
Yes.
And that's when you grabbed that shovel that we saw and you hit Jacob in the head with the shovel. That's your testimony?
Yes.
And in fact, Jacob fell to the ground. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And Sabrina got on top of him.
I don't believe so.
So Jacob's on the ground and Sabrina is standing?
I believe she was on the ground as well.
And it's your testimony that you've, at this point, already been stabbed through the arm, right?
Yes.
And which arm were you stabbed in?
This one.
Okay. So then you run into the kitchen and you lock Sabrina and Jacob in the garage.
No. I did not lock the door.
Okay. You ran in and just closed the door.
Yes.
And left them out there.
Yes.
Why, if you made it to the garage, why didn't you just keep running out of the house?
I don't recall.
You would have had to have run, under this version, Jacob and Sabrina come down those steps. They're fighting right there in front of the stairs. You would have had to have run right past them to go back through the door into the kitchen. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's what you believe you did? And in fact, the garage door was even open at that time, wasn't it?
I do not believe it was.
Now, you go back inside, it's your testimony, you don't lock that door, but you run down the hallway and you go into Heesun's bedroom, right?
Yes.
And you lock that door.
Yes.
And then you lock the bathroom door also?
Yes.
So now you've barricaded yourself behind 2 more locked doors, right?
Yes.
Now, you've identified Mr. Cayer here in court today when we all removed our masks, right?
Yes.
And you were close enough, you say, to see his face. You said he did the stabbing, right?
Yes.
You told the police that the person had shoulder-length hair. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And that the person was not wearing any mask at all, right?
Yes.
Okay. No attempt to conceal one's face whatsoever.
Correct.
And no facial hair, right?
No, he had facial hair.
Okay. Do you remember facial hair?
Yes.
Were you present in court when your 911 call was played?
No, I was not.
Have you had a chance to listen to your 911 call prior to your testimony?
Yes.
You would agree that in the 911 call, you were asked whether there was any facial hair, and you said, not that I saw.
I do not recall.
And you don't remember what you said on that call, right?
What do you mean?
About facial hair, you don't recall what you said.
No.
But that 911 call is you trying to describe everything you're seeing at the time, right?
Yes.
Is it your testimony that you believe you were stabbed in the kitchen area? That's where you remember being stabbed?
Yes.
Before you went into the garage area, right?
Yes.
And did you ever, you had your knife in your pocket this whole time, right?
Yes.
And it's your testimony you never utilized that knife in any way, right?
Correct.
Why didn't you pull the knife out to fend off the perpetrator?
I didn't think about it.
When you were, 1 minute please, Your Honor. I want to just ask a few more questions, touch on a couple other things with you, sir. Going back to Sonny, the mother, liking you, are you aware that Sabrina had a sister, Sarah May?
Yes.
And did you have contact and interaction with Sarah May?
Not that I can recall.
Were you aware of the mother's boyfriend, Raymond? Is that somebody you were familiar with?
Yes.
Sonny had a boyfriend named Raymond, right?
Yes.
And were you aware of anything Sonny had said to Raymond about not liking you?
Sustained.
That's all I hear her say. Yeah, I know. Going to the interview you did with the police at the hospital, you would agree that your written statement is a much shorter version than what was discussed over the 30 minutes or so that you talked to the officers, right?
Yes.
In other words, you were getting medical treatment and they were present talking to you during that time, right?
Yes.
And they were trying to understand what you believe happened in the what you saw in the house, right? That was the whole point of the questioning.
Yes.
And do you remember an officer named Officer Ehrenstein? Is that somebody that you're familiar with?
I do not recall, no.
Do you know the names of the officers who were interviewing you?
No.
Would you agree that you told the officers that the last time you saw Sabrina, she was in the garage on top of Jacob holding him down? Do you remember telling the officers that?
No, I do not.
As you sit here today, it's your recollection that she wasn't holding him down, he was just down on the ground, and that's when you ran from the garage?
Correct.
If you had a shovel and you had knocked him down to the ground, why would you just run into the house and not keep hitting the person?
I don't know.
That's all, thank you.
Any redirect?
You were asked about the garage door and whether the garage door was open or closed. When you recall going out to the garage to get the shovel, do you believe the garage door was open or closed at that point?
Closed.
Do you recall actually closing it or someone closing the garage door when you came in?
Yes.
And do you know who did that?
I believe I pushed the button to close it.
All right, and the button to open and close the door, where is that located?
Right next to the door to the kitchen
Okay.
from the garage.
Did you think about opening that door and running out before you went and grabbed the shovel?
No, I did not.
Okay. What was your purpose in grabbing the shovel?
To fight.
And you know, this was sort of described by defense as, well, you've got the shovel and you're standing over there in the corner just watching them struggle. I mean, was this a long period of time that you're standing there with the shovel before they come out the door?
No.
Is it fair to say that, in fact, all of this is happening very quickly?
Yes.
Is it a chaotic scene?
Yes.
So you do recall grabbing the shovel on the side of the garage, and then about how quickly after you went and grabbed the shovel did Jacob and Sabrina come out of the garage?
I'd say about 5 or 10 seconds.
So fairly quickly, they come right out.
Yes.
And then likewise, the physical struggle, that you striking Jacob and then running back in the house, does that happen fairly quickly?
Yes.
It's just a general question. Are there things you would have done differently if you could do this all over again and you had the time to reason your way through how to respond to this attack?
Absolutely.
It's fair to say at that time this was just chaos and you just did what was on instinct.
Yes.
Again, Mr. Cotton showed you a brief written statement. It was 1 page, right?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that everything that happened that night cannot really fairly be encapsulated in 1 page?
Correct.
And he talked to you about some of the inconsistencies, right? He talked to you about who got stabbed first, whether both of you went over to the bathroom to see Heesun in the bathroom. In your mind, is the big picture the vast majority of what happened? Has that been relatively consistent throughout this?
Yes.
Leading questions, Your Honor.
I don't know that I let him. I asked if it was, and he could say yes or no. And
I don't think that was a leading question. I'm going to overrule the objection.
do you know if in every one of your statements you said Mr. Cayer jumped out of the laundry room and attacked you?
I believe so, yes.
The weapon that Mr. Cayer used, do you know if that was consistent in all of your statements?
Yes, I believe so.
Can you tell us a little bit about that knife? Do you remember the knife itself?
Yes, it was, I believe it was a chef's knife.
In terms of the size of the knife, do you remember anything about the size of the knife?
About that big?
Oh, are you familiar with like a standard kitchen knife set?
Yes.
Would this be one of the small knives or one of the large knives?
One of the large knives.
As it compares to your folding knife, was it bigger or smaller?
Much bigger.
Do you recall if in every one of your statements you remember that you struck Mr. Cayer with a shovel?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you recall if in every one of your statements that happened in the garage?
Yes.
Is it possible that in one of the statements that wasn't actually consistent?
I do not believe so.
Okay. As you sit here today, where did that contact take place?
In the garage.
And in every one of your statements, do you describe Mr. Cayer as the person who did this?
Yes.
Is there any doubt in your mind that Mr. Cayer is the person who stabbed you and Sabrina?
No.
And you saw him stab Sabrina with your own eyes?
Correct.
Multiple times?
Correct.
Clearly you saw him stab yourself?
Yes.
Again, these are leading questions. I'm objecting because he's giving the answer.
Can you rephrase the question, Mr. Lissay?
I'll withdraw that question. At any point in time, did you see anyone else in the house other than Mr. Cayer, Sabrina, and Heesun?
No.
And to be clear, I'm talking about on the evening of June 7th, 2016.
Correct.
Before law enforcement arrived.
Yes.
No further questions, right?
Any recross?
Are you aware that Sabrina's body was eventually found next to the house? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Outside of the garage, right?
Yes.
So in terms of the garage doors must have been open for Sabrina to get out of the garage, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
Do you know when that garage door became open?
I do not know.
And it's your testimony here today that the garage door was... Do you recall when you were in the garage having contact with Mr. Cayer with a shovel, do you believe it was open or closed?
Closed.
Nothing further.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. You may remove your shield, put it in the basket marked use, and then replace your face mask. Thank you. And he's free to go?
His perspective, yes. I guess I would...
Yes.
At this point, I would clarify that Mr. Kennedy is clearly indicated as a statutory crime victim.
We don't object to him remaining present if he wishes.
He's released from his subpoena and no longer needs to testify, but you're welcome to stay if you want to watch any portion of the trial.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The state's next witness.
Your Honor, the next witness the state will be calling will be Kathleen Stigler. Can I just have a moment?
Yes, and it'll take a moment for us to clean the area where this witness had just been seated.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you.
Fine.
Yes. Thank you. Ma'am, if you'd please come up to the witness stand. Once you step up to the step, if you would please stop and then raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Kathleen Joanne Zeiler, Kathleen Joann Zeitler hyphen Porretto.
Thank you, ma'am. You may be seated, and once you're seated, you may remove your face mask and replace it with a face shield. Thank you, ma'am. That black box in front of you with the red light is a microphone, and thank you. As you scooch forward, your voice will project down from your face shield, so closer to the microphone helps. Thank you so much. All right, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Okay, Ms. Zeiler, to begin with, could you just state your date of birth for the record?
March 8th, 1952.
Okay. And we're going to go over just some general background information, just a few things. Are you married at this time?
Yes, I am.
And what is your husband's name?
Lauren Porretto.
Okay. Do you have any children?
I have 3 grown adults and 5 grandchildren.
Okay. And could you just briefly tell the jury your educational background?
Well, I graduated from high school and then took some classes in PTC for sales. I have a sign business.
Let's tell the jury your current occupation. What is your current job?
Well, for the last 38 years, I have a home business, and I started a sign company on my own, and I've been doing trucks, trailers, design logos, and brochures, and helping entrepreneurs in their businesses.
Okay. So I think you explained it a little bit, but it's a sign business, right?
Yes, a sign.
Tell the jury kind of just again in general what kind of signs you manufacture and make.
Well, at this point, they're different than when I was 38 years ago. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's vinyl graphics. So I'll design something for a business, and whether we put it in a truck or a trailer or a banner, and then I produce it, and then I install it.
Okay. Ms. Zeiler, I'm going to ask you some questions. Going back to a date, June 7th of 2016, when you think back, do you remember that date?
Yep.
And when you think back to that date, I want to ask, I'm going to back up a little bit. Did you know an individual named Heesun Teague?
Yes.
Okay. And could you tell the jury approximately when you first would have met Heesun Teague?
I met Sonny, it's Sonny, 2.5 years before this.
Okay. So you call her Sonny, that's her nickname?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you called her most of the time?
Always.
Okay. And so when you think back to June 7th of 2016, you met, as a reference point, you met Sonny about 2.5 years prior to that date?
Yes.
And tell the jury, how did you meet her in general?
Over at Green Bay Community Church in Howard, they have classes for divorce care and grief. Sonny her husband had died of cancer earlier, and I've had been single for a while, and I always like to learn more how I can help myself become a better person. And Sonny happened to be there at that class, and I remember her sitting by herself on a table, and I just happened to walk up to her and said hi, and I said, I'm glad you're here. And she says, how do you know you can trust somebody? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm your new best friend because you certainly can trust me. And from that day forward, we became best friends.
Okay. From that day forward, you talked to Sonny quite a bit, is that right?
Yes, we would talk at nighttime. We would talk in the mornings lots of times. She was retired, so she had lots of spare time. And me as an entrepreneur, I was working all the time out of my home. So I would be working while she's talking to me, or she would come over to my home. And sometimes she'd come on jobs with me to help me out.
Had you ever been to Sonny's house on Riverdale Drive?
I was only to Sonny's house one time.
Okay. And you said Sonny was retired. Do you know where she used to work before she retired?
The post office.
Okay. And did you know if Sonny had any children?
She has 2 daughters.
Okay. Do you remember the name of any of the daughters?
Sarah May, I believe it was, and Sabrina.
Okay. And then you mentioned that she did have a husband, but he had passed away from cancer. Okay, I want to get back to that date that I talked about, June 7th, 2016. On that date, I don't need to go into the specifics, but did you talk to Sonny on that date?
Yes, she had an earlier meeting with a friend of a relative, I think it was her husband, and she was kind of down. And I had invited her over to, I'm a cancer survivor as well as Sonny was a cancer survivor, to an event over at it's the old Rock Gardens. St. Mary's and St. Vincent's always has this event for people to come for a meal, and they have booths there, and you can get your picture taken, which we actually did. Informational booth, and then they had a speaker that was a comedian, and so after our meal, we sat and we watched that.
Okay.
So she met me there.
So you invited her to the Survivors celebration?
Yes, I did.
And that was because both you and Sonny were cancer survivors.
Exactly.
And you said it was at the Rock Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the place that's now, I think it might be, is it called 1951?
Yes.
Okay. You remember approximately where it's located?
It's on the west side of town. Not by, it's kind of off of, I don't know, military's over here, and I don't know how, it's off of, I don't know my streets real well. I'm not a street person. Okay.
Is Highway 41 fairly nearby, do you recall?
Like I said, I'm
Not
really
sure.
not good in...
Okay. I won't ask any more about directions.
Yes, spatial, forget it.
Can you remember on that date, when you think back, Mrs. Eitler, do you remember approximately what time you arrived at the Rock Garden?
I think around 4 o'clock, 4:30, something like that. Sonny was already there.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. When you say 4 or 4:30, are we talking, I assume, p.m.?
Yes.
So you're in the afternoon.
Right.
And you indicated that when you're there, was there a meal that was served?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Again, approximate time about that the meal you think began at that celebration?
I would think around 6 o'clock maybe. Because it was kind of like, people come and go. You eat and then you can get up and then you can go look at the displays and stuff like that.
Okay. And when you were there with Sonny, what was her demeanor like once she was there?
Oh, it was great. Like I said, we had a photograph together on the booth, and she was really happy she came. She was happy to be there, and also see other women that survived cancer.
Right.
And then of course the entertainment was a comedian, which had cancer, and we were both laughing because she was hilarious, and she was glad. She told so much. She was really glad that she came.
Do you recall when Sonny was going to leave that night?
Absolutely.
And how do you remember her leaving?
Just 1 second.
Okay. Just take your time. Okay.
then we got up and we walked by the side, or, away from all the tables. And she's my friend. She's my good friend. And we gave each other a hug. And she says, "I love you." I said, "I love you, Sonny." And I says, "I'm going to stick around because I want to talk to the speaker and tell her how good of a job she did." And she says, "Okay, well, I'm going to take off and I'll talk to you tomorrow."
Okay. And was that the last time you ever saw and spoke to her? Or when she was alive?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us, Mrs. Zeitler, approximately what time you believe it was when Sonny left the rock garden?
7:35.
p.m.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Mrs. Zeitler, I don't have any further questions for you today, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton?
Good morning, ma'am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So you were with Sunny the night that she was killed. Is that your testimony?
Yes, it is.
And that's June 7th, 2016, right?
Yes.
Sunny was somebody with whom you were close, right?
Yes.
And you had conversations about various things that were going on in everybody's lives, right?
Yes.
And you're aware from this event that Sunny had a daughter. You knew that Sunny had a daughter, Sabrina, right?
Yes.
And that Sabrina had started seeing a young man around that time, right?
Yes.
Like a boyfriend, right?
Well, I don't know which time we're talking about.
June of 2016, the months leading up to that.
I just...
Your Honor, I want to interject at one point here. I'm going to be objecting on behalf of the state on hearsay grounds if Mr. Cotton continues to ask this witness things that Heesun, for example, told her. It was hearsay. It's not. There's no exception to that rule. It seems like that's where Mr. Cotton's going to go right now and ask her more questions about that and going into things that potentially even Heesun would have said about her daughter or boyfriends or things like that. So I'm going to make that objection. I'm going to continue to object as I listen to these questions.
Okay, I'll proceed. Again, I want to ask you whether you and Sunny had discussions about the boyfriend that Sabrina started dating.
I didn't know it was a boyfriend. I just know it was a friend.
Okay. A friend who had moved into the house. You were aware of that, right?
I was aware that someone got hurt by a vehicle and broke a leg or something, and then got kicked out of a house, and that Sabrina evidently has a big heart and doesn't think of consequences but thinks of only helping somebody. And so then they wanted to come to Sonny's house because he got kicked out of the house, and she wasn't fond of that.
Your Honor, can we approach?
Yes. So, ma'am, I'm going to just ask that you only answer the question that's been asked and don't offer anything about what might have been said in these conversations that you may or may not have had with your friend Sunny.
Okay.
You talked about the man who had been run over by the car, right?
Yes.
As you understood it, the man that was run over by the car was the man dating Sabrina, right? That was your understanding?
Right,
Or not dating, but...
This is the continued objection on hearsay, that she's providing information that she hears from somebody else that's hearsay.
I'm not going to ask her what was said, Judge.
I think the only way she could have gotten the information that you're trying to elicit would be hearsay, so I'm going to sustain the objection. Unless you want to ask her if she's ever met this individual.
Did you ever meet that individual?
No.
Meaning the one who was run over by the car?
Correct.
Okay. Never had any conversations with him?
No.
Had you ever met, you had met Sabrina, that would be fair to say?
No.
So you've not met the daughter, just Sonny?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, nothing further for Mrs. Zeitler.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. You may remove your face shield and put it in the box marked used, and then put your face mask back on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. The state's next witness. Officer Jernbach, if you'd please come up to the witness stand. If you'd please raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Bradley A. Dernbach. First name is Bradley. Last name is Dernbach, D as in David, ERN, B as in boy, ACH.
Thank you. You may be seated. You're able to remove your mask and replace it with a face shield. Thank you.
Deputy Dernbach, can you state for the record where you work?
I am currently employed with the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been working with the Sheriff's Office?
I'll be 19 years this December.
What's your current role with the Sheriff's Office?
Currently, I'm an investigative sergeant with the Detective Division.
How long have you been with the Detective Division?
Since end of January of 2019.
Were you working with the Brown County Sheriff's Office in June of 2016?
Yes.
You know, what was your primary job duty at that time?
I was a patrol deputy assigned to the K-9 unit.
And what does that mean to be assigned to the K-9 unit?
I had a dual-purpose German Shepherd that would accompany me on my daily routine.
What sort of training is required in order to be a K-9 handler?
We initially go down to Albuquerque, New Mexico for a 6-week intensive training where you spend every day with your partner or your dog and train on a daily basis for those 6 weeks. My specialty was patrol, which would be tracking, building searches, area searches, things like that. And the other specialty was narcotics. So that was initial training. Once you get back, then you train pretty much on a daily basis for the life of the dog.
What's your dog's name?
Pal.
And when did you and Pal go to the training in New Mexico?
It would have been January 16th. Right around 2012.
So you've been with Pal for quite some time?
Yeah, I had Pal well, he retired the same time I did. And I had him he's 9 now. I got him when he was a year, so I had him probably about 6 years.
When you say retired, you mean you moved to a different role?
Correct. Yep. I moved to another division, so since he was at his age, they didn't want to give him to another handler, so he retired. So he stays home with me as a family pet.
All right. Back in June of 2016, you were partnered with Pal at that time, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to draw your attention to June 7th of 2016 in the evening hours, shortly after 8 p.m. Were you involved in a call in the village of Hobart?
Yes.
And what was your role in that call?
I was working the west side of the county. Myself and Deputy Mueller were about to approach on a different call where we were routed to the call that we were talking about at 1368 Riverdale. And it was for a disturbance involving a knife.
Is that your understanding of the nature of the call from dispatch? Is that it was a
Yes, that's what Brown County Dispatch informed us.
Were you given any indication that this was a serious call in terms of the incident that had occurred?
Yes, they stated that a male had the knife, was inside the residence with other individuals. So based on that, the seriousness was a high level. You could also tell from the tone of the dispatchers that were giving us this information that it was not your typical everyday call.
And when you arrived on scene at 1368 Riverdale, was anyone else present? Any other officers, excuse me?
When I responded, Deputy Mueller was present, and then shortly afterwards, or upon my arrival, Officer Webster from Oneida PD, and then Officer Radoff from Hobart Lawrence, and then also a few minutes later, Deputy Rosca from the Brown County Sheriff's Office responded.
Rachel, can I have the screen?
Detective Dernbach, just so you know, whatever is projected on the drop-down screen will also be projected on the TV screen in front of you, so if it's easier to look forward, you're able to do that.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Detective Dernbach, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 1C1. Can you identify that photograph?
That's the residence that we responded to at 1368.
Is that an overview photo?
Yes.
All right. And where is the residence in question in relation to that overview photo?
Pretty much right dab in the middle.
There are some other residences depicted on this photograph, but can you indicate when you arrived where you parked your squad vehicle?
I parked it to the west of the long driveway right in the middle.
Is the area where you parked your squad, is that actually visible on this photograph?
Probably not. I was farther to the west.
All right. So would that be the bottom and then left side?
Yeah, more like kind of where the bottom icons are.
Do we have a pointer, like a laser pointer perhaps, that would be useful?
Did he identify where in the picture he's pointing?
That would be my goal, so not only can the jury tell, but that we can tell on the record as well.
Could you indicate for the jury with the laser pointer approximately where you would have parked your vehicle?
Like if the road continued, it'd be right in here, this area.
Okay. So for the record, he's indicating an area just below the bottom of the photograph and then just left of center. There's a driveway that kind of comes up the center of the photograph from the bottom, and he's just to the left and below that on the photograph.
Thank you. Detective Dernbach, just so that the jury is clear, can you indicate with your pointer where it is the residence is? Which one is the residence that you responded to?
This is the residence we responded to.
Okay,
This
so
is the
when you
driveway.
said in the center, it's literally in the center of this image.
Yep. Yes.
Thank you.
So upon your arrival and upon the other officers coming on scene, did you formulate a plan to approach the residence in a safe manner?
Yeah, when I arrived on scene, I had a night officer with me, the Hobart Lawrence office with me, and then I informed Deputy Miller to go on the other side, so it would be the east of the driveway. At that point, we were one deputy short, so I asked dispatch if we had any other officers coming. At that point, Officer Roska got on the radio and said he was only a short distance out. So he waited when Officer Roska arrived on scene. I told him to approach with Deputy Miller on the east side.
And once Deputy Roska arrived on scene, all of you began to approach the residence?
Yep, in two different groups.
All right. And you approached from which side?
So there's a tree line here. My group, which would have been myself, Officer Webster, and Officer Raloff, who approached on this side of the tree line for cover. And then Deputy Miller and Deputy Roska approached on this side of the tree line for cover.
And just for the record then, the photo depicts a tree line that would be just to the left of the driveway on this photograph. And you and the officers with you approached from the left side of the tree line and the left side of the driveway, while Deputy Miller and Deputy Raska approached from the right side of the tree line on the right side of the driveway. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And then Investigator Dernbach, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 1C2. What's depicted in that photograph?
That's the long driveway leading up to that specific residence.
And on the left side of this photograph, heading up toward the house, does that depict the tree line where you made your approach?
Yep, we would have been on the other side of the tree line though.
Okay. So you can't actually see the area where you approached from. You were on the left of those trees, is that right?
That's correct.
On your approach to the residence, did you notice anything unusual?
I would say about halfway up to the residence, I noticed a bike laying in the tree line.
Before we get to the bike, I'm just going to show you 1C3. Detective Dernbach, can you indicate what's depicted in this photograph?
That would be the left side of the tree line that we walked up on.
Is that pointing back toward the road or toward the house?
But that's pointed towards back the roadway.
Okay. And the tree line that you approached from, do you see that on this photograph?
Yes.
And which side of the photograph?
That would be the right side.
Okay. And you approached, again, off the photo on the other side of this picture, is that right?
Yes.
And then I'm showing you what's been marked as 1C4. Can you identify what's depicted in that photograph?
Yeah, that's the bike I was talking about. So about halfway up to the tree line towards the residence, I observed this bike.
And to orient ourselves to the other previous photographs, is this on the left side or the right side of the tree line that you were approaching on?
So if you're walking up from the roadway, it would be on the left side of the tree line.
So the house is on the other side of this tree line, is that right?
Correct.
The bike that you observe in this photograph, is that, do you believe that's consistent with what you observed as you were making your approach to the residence?
Yes.
Did you do anything with that bike when you made your initial approach?
No, I never touched it.
Upon your approach to the residence, then what did you do?
We bypassed the bike. Just right around as we were making our approach, we were informed by Deputy Miller and Deputy Rosca that they located a female party on their side of the tree line.
Did they make any indications about the state, that female's state?
I don't recall.
Did you know if she had any injuries?
At a later time, I was informed that she had stab wounds.
I'm not offering for the truth of the matter, sir. I'm just trying to give an idea of what he believes he's getting himself into as he approaches the residence.
I'll allow it for that purpose.
Upon arrival, do you ultimately make contact with the front of the residence?
Correct.
And what do you do then when you approach the residence and make contact at the door?
Well, before we made contact with the door, I requested a deputy right off to go to the rear of the residence just to keep cover, just so nobody leaves the back of the residence. That time, me and Officer Webster from Oneida PD approached the front of the residence with Canine Pal.
Are you in contact with dispatch at that time consistently?
Yeah, continuously.
All right. So what is your expectation about who's in the house at that time?
At that point, we didn't really realize who was in the house, how many. The only one that we knew was in the house for sure was Kennedy.
Is that the person who's on the phone with dispatch?
Correct.
So then what did you do once Webster was with you and you're starting to make contact at the residence?
I requested for another officer through dispatch. A short time later, Deputy Famry came and joined myself and Officer Webster. I asked dispatch if Joel Kennedy was still on the phone with dispatch. They stated yes. I informed dispatch to inform Joel Kennedy to come to the front of the residence where we were at by the front door so we could render aid and make him safe.
And did Joel do that?
Joel did.
You ultimately did make contact with Joel at that residence?
Yes.
And where was that at the residence?
Right at the front door.
After Joel came out of the house, then what did you do?
A series of questions was asked to Joel, who was inside the house, who could still be inside the house, just to get some mindset on who we could be coming in contact when we go inside the house.
And what happened next?
We were informed that that he believed that the mom was still inside the residence. At that point, I gave several announcements asking if anybody was inside the residence to come up to my voice, and nobody responded.
So then what did you do?
I proceeded to have Canine Pal clear the structure, the residence. It's normal protocol. We'll have the canine search in front of officers going in for officer safety. So Canine Pal would search a portion of the residence where I could see him. And at that time, I would either recall him or put him down in a lay position. Then officers would search up to Canine Pal, and this was done in a methodical way.
And upon your search of the residence, did you encounter anyone inside the residence?
Yes, we encountered the mom.
And where was she located?
She was located down the hallway of the first door to your right, which was a bathroom where the sink and the shower was running, and she was located inside the bathtub.
Did you do anything with her?
No, we continued to clear the residence. At a later time, I told dispatch that we did have a second victim, and as soon as the residence was cleared, to have rescue personnel outside the residence to attempt to render aid if needed.
And were you there when rescue was escorted into the residence?
Yep, I personally escorted them inside the residence, where they did a quick check, stated that she was beyond help. At that point, based on the fact that this was a crime scene, I escorted them directly back out.
When you were initially clearing the residence, how many officers were inside with you?
It was myself, Deputy Famry, Officer Webster from Oneida PD, and then Canine Pal.
Aside from Joel, who came out of the residence, and Heesun, who you saw in the residence, did you locate anyone else inside the house?
Nobody that was inside. No, we didn't locate anybody else.
After the residence was cleared, where did you go?
I went back outside the residence where obviously rescue, we had rescue come in and I'll come out. And then I directed a few other deputies to clear the garage, the attached garage and also the detached garage. During this time I made contact with the supervisor on scene, which was Lieutenant Jason McCauley.
After making contact with Lieutenant McCauley, what was decided about how you proceed forward?
Since we did not find Jacob, or believed to be Jacob, I requested that I tried to locate a track for any persons that may have left the scene using Canine Pal.
And then is this something, locating a track, is that something you're specifically trained to do?
Yes.
And what did you and Pal do in order to begin locating a track?
Well, initially around the house, what we call is contaminated by several deputies that were on perimeter checking the outbuildings. So what I need to do is I need to stretch my search farther out from where it's not contaminated by other officers. So we did that on the D side of the residence. It's a longer backyard. So at that point, again, myself, Canine Pal, and Deputy Raska, we attempted to start to locate a track.
Detective Dernbach, I've gone back to photograph 1C1. Could you use the laser pointer and then try to describe where you began your track searching for a party outside the residence?
Right in this area. I started to give Canine Pal directions to start locating a track, and we worked counterclockwise.
So you began at the laser pointer near the top middle of the screen, just to the right of center.
Yep.
There's a tree line to the right and in the back of the home, and then you follow the track sort of along the tree line to the top of the photo and then over to the left in a counterclockwise manner.
Yep.
At some point in time, did your dog give you any indications?
Yep. As we work in counterclockwise, right around this area, Canine Pal exhibited what we call a change of behaviors. His intensity level rose. He pulled his head towards the ground and wanted to start pulling me into the woods. This has been exhibited numerous times in training on real calls, where at this point he has something or he has a track that he wants to follow.
And do you know about how long after your arrival at the residence that you got to that point where the dog indicated?
I would say within 30 minutes.
Can you use that laser pointer once again to show the spot on the map where Pal first began to indicate or change his behavior?
Right in here.
So that is just up to the top of the house, to the left and the rear of the house. There is a tree line that then turns into a larger forest area, and it's just at the front of that forest area as you are on the back left-hand side of the house. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Once the dog had that change of behavior, what was your next step?
I put Pal in what a German command is called Platz, which is tells him to lay down. The reason for this is I only had one deputy with me, and I wanted at least two more with me, just for lethal cover, in just in case we come across someone. I obviously have to control Canine Pal. We still want someone with lethal cover, and then someone has to go hands-on. So at this point, Lieutenant McCauley sent over Officer Webster, who initially cleared the residence with me, and then also Deputy Miller from the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
And who was the other deputy that was initially with you also?
Deputy Araska.
Okay, so then once the four of you are together, what do?
I gave him commands that one's going to stay on my right, one's going to stay on my right, one's going to stay on my left, and one's going to be my rear cover. And then Pal will be out in front leading us.
And did Pal at that point then begin or continue his search?
Yep. I At that point, I gave him another command to proceed with the track, and we proceeded directly north.
So then at that point, he's proceeding directly north, which is straight up and down on the photo, into the more heavily covered forested area?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did he indicate on a subject?
Yeah. Well, we went directly north, and then we moved a little bit to the left. At this point, he left the ground and had his head go up. He started pointing with his nose, smelling or sniffing. This is, again, another common characteristic. So now he's an odor of something. It's at this point I had Canine Pal come back to me, where at this time I took the long lead off of him, the leash, where you could work off leash. My plan was to have only work off leash as far as I could see him.
And as soon as he was let off leash, where did he go?
He went directly from right around in this area, directly to the east, where he started working a scent cone, which is in and out, trying to pinpoint a source. After a few seconds, he started to go into some deeper brush and do like a pulling motion. And then a short time later, we heard yelling and screaming. And at that time, me and the other deputies and officers approached that area where we did find the suspect.
And that whole time period, the track that begins at the front of the wood line and then goes up to the north and then over to the east, what's the time frame, start to finish there?
A few minutes.
So
I would say less than 5 minutes for sure.
All right. Once the dog makes contact with the subject, what do you do?
The dog engages. I couldn't see one of his hands. Asked him where the knife was. He stated he didn't have the knife. I still couldn't see one of his hands. The other officers and deputies went hands-on. We could see both of his hands. At that time, I released Canine Pal from Jacob, and then walked Canine Pal away from Jacob so he couldn't re-engage. And then the officers and deputies took control of Jacob.
You indicated something about asking him about a knife. Do you recall making a specific request about a knife?
Well, of course, my training and safety and officer safety is obviously someone inside the residence had a knife. I didn't see a knife inside the residence when I cleared. So my worry was that the individual still had a knife on him. So I wanted to know where that knife was, especially when I couldn't see one hand initially. So that's why I asked where the knife was.
And do you recall his response?
He said he left it inside. And he said he didn't have the knife, he left it inside.
And you indicated that you then pulled the dog off of him after the other officers went in to make contact with him.
Mm-hmm.
Which direction do you leave the area with your dog?
I left the same way I came in.
So you tracked back through the wooded area?
Yep, so I tracked back here just because that's where my canine squad was, obviously, to put Canine Pal back in the squad.
Did you have any specific involvement then with searching Jacob and then processing him further?
I did not have any contact with Jacob until when at the hospital, where it's normal protocol for myself, the canine officer, after an engagement to take photographs of the engagement. But on my arrival, I was already informed by our deputy near with the Brown County Sheriff's Office that he took care of the photographs for me. So I didn't have to do that.
Did you have an opportunity to observe Mr. Cayer's face, either on the arrest or at the hospital?
At both.
Okay. Your Honor, at this point in time, I again would ask that all of us in the counsel table and in the first row remove our masks so that I can ask Investigator Dernbach about an identification.
All right. If everyone in the first row and at counsel tables would remove their masks.
Detective Dernbach, do you see the person who your dog engaged with in court here today?
I do.
Can you describe where he's seated and what he's wearing?
Sitting the table to the right of me in a gray button-down shirt to a guy with a nice blue suit on.
How many individuals are at that table?
3.
And where is he in orientation?
He would be the farthest right of me or farthest left of you guys.
Thank you very much.
Everyone can please return or place their mask back on.
Did you have an opportunity to make any observations about the defendant's person, about his clothing, or anything else while you were in contact with him that night?
I did not.
So essentially, once your dog had engaged, one of your primary roles is get the dog off of him and get the dog out of there.
Yeah, my primary role at that time is he was cooperating. We had hands on the individual. He was no longer a threat to us. So my point is to remove Canine Pal from the engagement and make sure he doesn't re-engage because the dogs are pretty hyped up. So my role was just to get the dog away so he doesn't get any more accidental bites.
Mr. Lassay, before you go any further, are you asking the record to reflect anything about the identification?
I would ask the record to reflect that the witness did identify the defendant.
The record will so reflect that Detective Dernbach identified the defendant.
Detective Dernbach, I've added another photograph here, which is Exhibit 1C5. Can you identify what that photograph depicts?
That's the location where we located Jacob Cayer in the woods.
And how was his body positioned when you first located him?
And they lay down, curled up position.
And what is that area like in terms of the brush around it and things like that?
It's thickly wooded, especially up to like the knees of the waist, with some open spots here and there, but it's your typical woods.
And I've got one more photograph for you here. It's 1C6. Do you know what that photograph depicts?
Yeah, that would be kind of where I started Canine Pal on the initial track, or to attempt to locate the track.
So this is the back of the residence, and then can you see on this photograph the area where Canine Pal first indicated that he had developed a track?
Be like right in that corner.
So just above the middle of the photograph, sort of the start of the wooded area. Is that fair?
Correct. Yes.
And then the track went in the woods to the right of this photograph, so it'll go from left to right?
Yes.
All right. Anything else? Kind of a silly, obvious question, but 1368 Riverdale Drive, you know what municipality that's in?
Yeah, Hobart.
Is that in Brown County, Wisconsin?
Correct.
All right. Thank you. I have no further questions for you at this time.
Thank you.
Could we, Mr. Lassay, could we queue up 1C1, please?
Before, I just wanted to ask, for timing purposes, seeing we're heading into the lunch break time, do you anticipate having many questions?
No. We'll
okay.
if it's okay with the jury, would it be 10 minutes and we can
Okay.
be done with this witness?
All right. That seems like everyone's nodding that would be okay. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi there.
You see the Exhibit 1C1 behind you?
Yes.
And that would be fair to say that's an overview, right?
Yes.
Now, if we just... You have the laser pointer, right?
I do.
So it's sort of in the middle of the photo is the Teague residence, fair to say?
Say that again.
In the middle of the photo is the victim's residence, fair
Yes.
to say? And then just above it is that tree line where you found Mr. Cayer?
Yes.
And as I understand it, you're basically the canine handler, right?
Yes.
So it's the point of your canine in this instance was to locate a person, right?
Yes.
As opposed to other things it could locate, like drugs and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
So when you see the dog smelling, that's an indication. How does the dog know it's searching for a person? Is it can search just for drugs or person interchangeably?
It's all about routine commands, keywords.
So there's a keyword you give that signals look for a person's odor, right?
It's keywords to search, if I want him to do a track, if I want him to do an area search, I want him to do a wind scent, or if I want him to search for drugs. They're just keywords that we use.
Okay. And you knew generally that you were responding to the scene of a stabbing incident, right?
Yes.
And that a suspect may or may not be in that vicinity, right?
Yes.
So the dog is looking for human scent, fair to say?
Yes.
And at some point the dog, you say engaged, but layman's term might be bit Mr. Cayer, right?
Yes.
In other words, it bit his arm, right?
Yes.
And the dog is trained, is it not, when it goes off leash, it's trained to do that, right?
It's trained to search for human odor.
Right,
Yeah.
and then bite the person.
Unless they can't get to them. Like say if someone's up in a tree or not accessible, they're blocked, like, let's say in an outhouse, if they can't get to them, then they're trained to what we call bark, to let me know that he's there, but they can't get to him.
Right, but if the dog can get to him, then he bites him, right?
In most circumstances, yes.
And that's what happened here.
Yes.
And you were how far were you from the dog when it bit Mr. Cayer?
15 yards, 45 feet.
If we could, Mr. Lassay, would you be okay putting photo 5 up for me? Photo 5, please. This is the location where Mr. Cayer was found, right?
Yes.
Sort of in the open, if you will, with some branches on the ground and things like that, right?
Yes.
And you saw the dog bite him. You saw your canine bite him, right?
Well, initially I saw him like it was all brushed, so I just saw pale, jerking with his head.
Okay.
Because initially there was no screaming or yelling. So then there was screaming and yelling, then we approached, and that's when I saw my dog was engaged.
And then you heard the screaming after that, right?
Yes.
From Mr. Cayer.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that when the dog engaged Mr. Cayer, he was laying curled up. That's your testimony?
Lay down, in a curled motion, I would say that.
So, as we're picturing it, somewhat of a curved type body leg.
Yeah, I mean, he was moving around a lot. So, I mean, at one point he was curled up, some point he was straight.
Okay. Moving around because the dog's engaging him, right?
That's correct.
Not running from law enforcement, right?
Correct. He was not running.
Not fleeing through the woods and the dog took him down, right?
Correct.
You've had those experiences, haven't you?
Yes.
Where the dog has to go get the person and take him down, right?
No, I don't think I have, actually. In training, yes, and on a real life call, no.
Okay. And in terms of questioning Mr. Cayer, you didn't ask any other questions other than the knife, right?
Correct.
Because you knew a knife had potentially been involved, right?
Correct.
And then you removed the dog and other officers were in charge of taking Mr. Cayer away from the scene, fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Can you redirect?
Know the area of his body where he was bitten,
Yes.
Mr. Cayer?
Yes.
Where was that?
Was in his leg, not his arm.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
I just thought he was making just an idea, but it was in his leg, not arm.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. That's all.
All right, thank you. You may step down. Detective Sternbach, you can put your face shield in the box marked used and then use your face mask to leave. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our lunch break now until 1 o'clock. Your lunch should be here. You're welcome to eat in the hall or go outside. There's picnic tables. The bailiffs will direct you. I do need to remind you not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else or do any research on your own. Please stand for the jury. Please be seated. Rachel, can I ask you to close the door? Could you close the door? Thank you. I'll make a brief record about the two sidebars that we had. The first one was in response to a question that Mr. Cotton was asking Mr. Kennedy about a YouTube search for famous last words. There was an objection about this pertaining to a pretrial motion. At the sidebar, I basically said that I did rule that the evidence regarding third-party guilt would not be admitted, but that didn't mean that Mr. Cotton was unable to ask questions about the YouTube search. There was a question about relevance. I allowed it. And then the rest we put on the record. Is that basically the sum total of what we discussed off the record?
I believe so, Your Honor, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a second sidebar when, I don't remember the woman's name who was testifying, the best friend of Sonny. I think you referred to her as Ms. Zeitler. There were some questions being asked that Mr. Johnson was concerned was going to lead to hearsay, and then ultimately she started responding with what would have been hearsay, and we had a sidebar to discuss that. Mr. Cotton said he wasn't intending to elicit any of those types of answers. I instructed the witness then back on the record to be careful with her answers, and I don't really think we discussed much more. I know Mr. Johnson had the exhibit. One of you had the exhibit. I guess I can't remember who was holding the exhibit. But anything else you want to put on the record about that?
No, I believe that accurately reflects the sidebar.
Mr. Cotton?
That's accurate. I do think just going forward we might potentially have that issue again. And so I would just point out 90804 sub 1 sub D to the court. I think provides an exception going forward to statements made by the decedent, Your Honor. Assuming, of course, relevance would have to be adhered to, but it's a hearsay exception.
Can you say that statutory section again?
90804 sub 1 sub D.
What types of statements are you referring to that you think might be at issue?
I don't know if there will be, but similar in the similar vein of what we were just dealing with Ms. Zeitler. For example, Heesun wanting Mr. Kennedy to not be present in the house.
Well, obviously we'll have to take those up as they come, but I don't know who's going to testify to that or what that might be related to, but if those issues arise and there's an objection, we'll deal with it.
Yeah, also, I mean, the 90804 sub 2 clearly says that if a declarant is unavailable to the defendant's actions, that the proponent of the statement cannot use that. So here, clearly, Sonny Teague is not able to tell us what happened because of Mr. Cayer's actions, and therefore, I don't believe that exception applies.
But I do. That's the general rule is correct. It may be premature to argue it, but that's only applies. It's a forfeiture by wrongdoing exception, and it only applies when the person was killed to prevent them from testifying. So if the purpose of killing the person is to prevent them from testifying, then that is an exception that is barred. But if they're killed for another purpose, then that we would still be allowed to ask those questions.
I don't know what the purpose is that Ms. Teague was killed, so that would be something that would be difficult for me to analyze at this point, but we'll take those up if we need to later, those objections. With regard to any other issues, is there anything else we need to make a record of?
I just would make a brief observation if I could. Sure. With the last witness, the court may recall that there was a statement made about questioning Mr. Cayer about a knife, and that Mr. Cayer made a remark that he had left a knife in the house. That is a reason there was no objection to that is because that's clearly an exception to the Miranda requirements under New York versus Quarles. We didn't object to that, and Mr. Lassay was kind enough to flag that issue in advance, just so the record is clear what our thought process was, not objecting on Miranda grounds, Judge.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Now, with respect to the one issue that we talked about before we started today, is that an issue that's going to present itself yet this afternoon? or can we wait till the end of the day to deal with that argument?
I anticipate that we could wait until the end of the day to address that argument. Based on our proposed witness list, we anticipate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 7 more officers today at most before the witness who would testify about that issue would present. That witness is Zach Holschbach, who took Mr. Cayer's statement. That witness I anticipate would be quite lengthy. I wouldn't want to try to get to Mr. Holschbach today. He'd be our 11th witness. If we can get through 10 witnesses today and not call Mr. Holschbach, I'll be pleased with our progress in terms of getting done in time.
Okay, then we won't take that issue up now, and we'll break for lunch, and we'll see you back at 1. If you want to arrive a few minutes before in case there's something we need to make a record of, that would be appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. 1 o'clock. Thank you.
So I have to go from home to the second one. I'm going to run this downstairs.
You did the night one.